The moment I hit rock bottom, and how I kept moving forward. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward." For me, this came out very literally. It was just exercise. A couple of months ago, I was crawling, and now I'm walking. I doubt I'll ever be flying, but at least I'm stronger than I was. After my mum died, I set a single goal to do something productive each day. For a while, it was just getting out of bed. Then it was brushing my hair. Then it was cooking something to eat. As each little thing graduated from my thing for the day to just habit, I'd add a new thing. It took a while to be functional again. It really did feel like I was crawling when everyone else was running. This is a real tactic and it works well. I always tell myself I have to do 2 things every day. Depending on the day, it could just be getting out of bed and feeding myself. On better days, it's getting some work done and doing dishes. Just committing to 2 things sounds simple, so it helps me keep to it. And I'm sorry about your mom. I hope you're doing okay and continuing to graduate and doing the things. This is going to sound stupid to most who haven't been through it, but my ex-husband of 17 years cheated on me with my best friend. It was all so cliché. We had 2 preteen boys that he didn't want anything to do with. Somehow I kicked him out of the house, didn't accept his fake apologies, and then watched my run turn into a walk and then a crawl. I dragged us through every day. It happened the last 2 weeks of school, and I still went to their end-of-the-year award programs and smiled, even though neighbors were whispering as I hosted birthday parties minus a parent, and I taught one to drive. I'm not completely sure how I was strong enough, but I brought us all forward in those dark days. I wasn't going to let this affect them. And now, even with their dad living 3 miles away with his new family and acting like they don't exist, I crawl with them on my back. My wife died June of 2015. I lost my job the same moment she passed because I was her home caretaker for 3 years because she was in a persistent vegetative state. I became an addict again after 22 years of sobriety, and my service dog of 10 years died. I survived an attempted murder from 2 people with rebar and wound up with brain damage and a broken neck. I got evicted because I couldn't afford any more to live in our townhome. I walked away from 30 years of memories because I had nowhere to store anything. I spent 2.5 years homeless, living on the streets and in shelters, and the majority of everything that happened to me happened in 6 months. I finally got on Social Security for schizoaffective disorder that I got from using substances after my wife died, and I finally got a home again back in September. The point is, I got through it all because I kept moving forward. My God. I can't see myself pulling out of any one of those things you mentioned, but then again, maybe nobody does and we don't know until we have to do it. I'm really glad you're gradually fixing. I graduated high school in 2001. I tried the 4-year university thing. I was really depressed and didn't go to class much because of it. After the first semester, I dropped out and enlisted. 3 years later, I was medically discharged, worked multiple crap jobs while attending CC, found a somewhat decent job while nearing the completion of my associates, and then the recession happens. Finish my associates while spending a year on unemployment. Unemployment runs out and I decide to hold off on trying to transfer to finish my 4-year degree. Got a job at a gas station, month later promoted to assistant manager, 8 months later I'm store manager. A year later I leave for a contractor position at a bank doing ATM support. About a year later I'm hired on as an employee. 5.5 years later I'm in a new salaried role doing data analysis and finishing that degree. My IT career. I feel like I'm flying now, but holy smokes did I start off as a slow crawl though. This is extremely minor, but I completed a 5K. I'm not a runner. In fact, I hate running. I have short legs and small feet. I'm slow and overweight. I did train, albeit not much. I started the race by running until I was out of breath. We're talking a half mile in. Then it was intermittent, walking and running until the end. I was the second to last person to finish, but I didn't care. It was one of the best highs I've ever had. It felt good to accomplish something I'd always told myself I'd do someday, but never worked up the courage to try. I was proud of myself. I love this. Good for you. Keep after it. When I was 22, I lost my leg due to a self-deletion attempt, and becoming an amputee as a result of my own stupid actions was extremely difficult, but I decided I was going to keep living and really see what I could do with the time and the resources I had. I always thought I was too stupid and ugly to do anything with my life, but once there wasn't much left to lose, I got my crap together and stopped being a victim And now I'm 25, going to school, clean and sober, no friends or girlfriend or family really, but I'm content being alone with my thoughts, and I think my prosthetic limb looks pretty cool. Man, I thought you were going to say, now I'm 40 and I finally got my crap together. But 3 years is an amazing turnaround in that circumstance. My hat's off to you, sir. My personal favorite anecdote is about the philosopher who became depressed when he concluded that there was no meaning to life or the universe, and he wanted to try and no longer be alive anymore. But then he realized that if there was no external meaning, it meant that life could mean anything he wanted it to mean, and immediately snapped him out of his funk and he went on with his life. And the lesson there is, a simple matter of perspective can make all of the difference. And that doesn't mean that people can just magically cure their depression, but it does mean that the feeling of hopelessness and despair that feels all-consuming, it isn't forever. It feels like it tells you it is, but it's a liar. There's happiness and purpose inside of you, inside of all of us, and it's worth fighting for. I rode my bike across the US, most of it solo. In the middle of Missouri, I just had enough. I stopped on some guy's lawn and I just cried. He came out and asked me what was up, and I explained how far I'd come, starting in San Francisco, and that I was just done. He told me to ride into town, I think Springfield, which was only 10 miles away, and I could take a few days off and rest. Which is what I did because, hey, one more day wouldn't matter, and the worst that would happen is that I'd pack it in and go home. Well, a day of rest seemed to be exactly what I needed. I spent a whole day, or most of it anyway, in blessed air conditioning, ate all of the food and drank all of the water, and was more or less ready to go again. I took a few more one-day breaks between Missouri and Williamsburg, VA, which really helped me out. So yeah, 1 step back, 2 steps forward. Living, to be honest. My parents never believed, and still don't, that depression was a real thing, so they never got me help when I was younger. I'm 30 now and still crawling on. Boy, do I ever feel you on this. My parents always thought I was just acting up, from middle school on, when I was really just so depressed that I hated myself and pretty much everyone else. I didn't even realize that's what it was until I finally went to the doctor at 25 because I was having mood swings from really aggressive to I don't want to get out of bed. She diagnosed me with bipolar, starting me on medication, and put me in touch with a psychologist. From there, it was slow going, but things started to improve. But when I called my mum after I left the doctor's office, she just started raising hell, saying that there was nothing wrong with me, that I was just lazy, it was all in my head. Yeah, Mum, that's where mental illness comes from. And my dad was even worse. But eventually, he came around when he saw the improvement in me. Mum kind of came around, but not really. She believes that the medication and counseling have helped me, but still doesn't really believe in mental illness. She's been diagnosed as bipolar also. She cussed the doctor out, walked out, and started looking for a new doctor the next day. She always tells me that it's not her, it's the situation, or it's fill in the person's name that's causing her to be the way that she is. So I definitely know where you're coming from. Having been there, I can empathize with you. But you'll be walking soon and then running, maybe even flying. I'm 41 years old now. I've been on medication for 16 years. The first few years were still rough, but slowly it does get better. Honestly, I felt a big improvement just getting diagnosed from the relief of knowing what was actually going on. I'd say I'm running right now. I don't think I'll ever fly, but before I went to the doctor that day, I can't even say that I was crawling. I was just laying there. So, have hope for yourself and know that at least one person out there is rooting for you. A while back, I was trying to make an app, learning from scratch, and it was hard to find time around work, friends, and my girlfriend, but I had the mantra of, if I've only got 10 minutes, then do 10 minutes. The actual 10 minutes didn't achieve much, but it kept in my mind, and when I had a spare couple of hours, I was in the mindset to do that couple of hours, and over the months, my project gradually grew and grew. Eventually, I got out of the habit, and the app got less and less attention, so it never got finished. I'm furloughed right now. Maybe it's a good time to get crawling again. When I was quickly dipping into depression again about my relationship with my dad, it was crappy. It was slow to recover, but I didn't go back without going forward afterwards. I saw someone write that Martin Luther quote about flying, running, walking, and crawling, that one at the beginning of the video. The first thing that came to mind was getting sober from substances and alcohol. This process describes perfectly what I went through. Excellent quote. Being sober sucks for a while, and then your brain rewires to find the joy in life sober. Best decision I made in a long time. I hope your recovery is going well. I guess when you can genuinely see each day as an achievement compared to what you have before, it must be a very rewarding thing beyond a certain point. I'm lucky that so far in my life, the urge to drink has mainly just been a slight nagging thirst, even if I'm really at my worst. I can't imagine the strength needed to get off a stronger dependence. Depression. Somehow, I keep right on enduring, and it's how I survive depression and the darker tendencies every year. In these rough periods of my life, there's a phrase that I constantly think of whenever I feel like I can't move forward. An arrow has to go back in order to move forward. Granted, I know that it's in Spanish and I can't remember where I read it, but for whoever needs to hear this, it's okay to step back and see where you're at in order to know what you want to aim at. Stay strong, fellow internet people. When I'm feeling really down or having a blood sugar episode where I can barely get out of bed and walk far enough to the bathroom, I start saying, "Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You've killed my father. Prepare to die." You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? When my very heavy wheelchair broke down right before my final architecture school assignment, I asked random strangers to take the freshly printed floor plans to the right classroom. Everyone was running to get their own stuff delivered in time, so I asked people to push me for 10 meters or so. The third guy pushed me all the way through, and the plans got delivered in time. Thank you, kind strangers. I'd hope your professors would have been understanding had you handed in your assignment late. Drawing. After losing everything I ever drew in my life due to a crappy moving company, I was devastated and didn't draw for a few years. Eventually, I got a whiteboard and said, I'll just do a stupid little doodle once a week. Then it became once a day. They got more elaborate, and then 5 days ago, I picked up a sketchbook and pencil for the first time in years and said, just 10 minutes, a couple of days a week. I've ended up getting lost in it for a couple of hours already, and I can't describe the feelings of joy when I look at the completed outline and thought, holy crap, it actually looks like the thing I'm drawing. I've barely begun shading, but I'm so excited to continue it tomorrow. When I left my bullying ex-husband, immediately before he had maxed out my credit cards and spent all of the savings. Earlier, he prevented me from finishing my Bachelor of Science and from working. I had 2 toddlers and friends who were kind enough to share time watching the babies so I could work enough to get by. He stalked me and hounded me with threats daily. I also broke a tooth in half from stress grinding, and I was hospitalized for a week for what should have been a minor illness. There were at least 5 times I could have easily died that year. I did some work from home and paid off enough of my credit line to charge tuition to it. I honestly thought it would kill me, but I finished a degree and kept my babies alive while well under the poverty line, with only some help from friends. Just enough childcare to cover, sometimes not enough and I'd have to call in. It felt impossible. The only thing that got me through was telling myself that I could because I was already doing it, so I could keep on doing it, and the belief that eventually it would get better. We got through. I got a degree and a decent job, and the kids are well. I've bought a house. We've come so far in just a few years. It's amazing, really. I was deep in depression for most of a year. No job, no friends, heartbroken. I had a roof over my head thanks to my parents, but nothing else besides. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life and no resources to pursue it if I did. Something like finishing college or traveling the world or pursuing my artistic dreams or having a loving relationship were completely beyond my grasp. But one day I messaged an acquaintance, actually an ex-girlfriend of a guy I knew, and I asked if she wanted to hang out. Eventually, that became a relationship. We got married. I started publishing books, we lived in Europe for a while. None of that was possible from the place I started in. But I dug myself out one small victory at a time. Life keeps changing. I'm divorced, but in a much healthier and happier relationship, living far from where I'd ever been. I found another fulfilling career and lots of good friends. And I'll still never fall into the place I was in again because I have memory of my own success. Once you can recall confidence, you can always use that as the first step to anything else. Overcoming my addiction to doing the deed. It caused the end of my relationship, and all I can do is keep pushing forward. If I stop the momentum, I'll be stuck at square one in the pit of despair. I'll do better every day from here on. I couldn't become a vet. I realized too late in my career that this was the career I wanted, so instead I adopted a ton of cats, volunteered at the zoo, and have recently applied to be a foster cat mum. Animals really give me joy. Higher education. If I can't get an A, get a B. If I can't finish a paper, at least write 3/4 of it really well. And if I feel like giving up, just do one sentence at a time. So far, it's worked. I have 1 semester left for my bachelor's and then it's on to Harvard. The one time I went to a support group at the hospital following my overuse of substances, which was a reaction to being a victim of the unspeakable act. The therapist told me that same Martin Luther King quote which has been mentioned a few times already. Not one part of me wanted to be alive. And those few weeks were the hardest of my life, but those words stuck with me. I didn't really get out of bed much once home, but after a few days I kept thinking about this, and remember quite literally rolling out of bed and basically crawling to the bathroom to shower for the first time in a while. A very literal example of this, but I think of this quote a lot when times are tough. Sometimes you really just have to endure and crawl until you can continue on your path walking. I was once a fully non-functional alcoholic. In and out of jail, losing jobs, I almost died, the whole 9 yards. Now I'm a functioning alcoholic. I drink way too much, but I do have a stable job and haven't been arrested in over 3 years. I'm building credit, the whole other yard. So I've got that going for me, which is nice. Pulling myself out of a mental health situation where I was hearing voices. I had full-on conversations every waking moment for about a year, and then one day I woke up and said, "Screw this. This isn't normal," and I got serious about fixing it and did it. Sometimes it's just the dishes. Gotta just roll up your sleeves and do it, even if you're tired and just want to watch Netflix and become one with the couch. Yep, one step at a time, one foot after the other. I really respect people who live with any form of severely demotivating condition or circumstance. There have been times in my life I could barely do this much just because of sheer laziness. I can't imagine having more pressing down on me. My life was completely devastated by some pretty horrifying events in my teens. It took a while for it to sink in and for the effects to kick in. I had to drop out of university after nearly 3 years, completely depressed, and I gained a ton of weight on medication. I literally went from being a conventionally attractive girl to someone who was very overweight, although still in my opinion quite beautiful. I dropped out of university, I had a boyfriend, but most of my friends disappeared. I had a breakdown and spent a night in a psych ward. I did everything I could do to help myself after that. I got books on the internet that I knew could help me. I went to see a therapist. Twice a week, I got 2 buses and walked a long way to see the same therapist. I was huge from the meds, and I felt like such a failure, but I just kept on going. I got a part-time job, which really helped me with my emotion regulation. I saved up money to go and see my boyfriend. During the year, I applied for new courses at university. However, in the ultimate act of humility, I ended up going to continue the same degree at a much lower-class university. I still had a good time. There, people didn't think much of me. I was overweight and still quite emotionally unstable. I was having symptoms from the trauma that affected me in a really bad public way. But I knew I was going somewhere. I kept my head down and ran. Through all the humiliation and some bullying, I did my degree, even though my concentration was so bad from the trauma that I had to work all night every night and had no social life whatsoever. I went to more therapy, and when it went south, I went to more. I finished that degree seemingly unable to live alone. However, I found the subject I was truly passionate about, and this motivated me to persevere. Instead of moving in back home, I proceeded to do 2 master's degrees. And by the way, I continued to have many public and humiliating symptoms, and I nearly got kicked out of uni a couple of times because they didn't like it and refused to understand. But I kept on going. 5 years after dropping out, I have 2 masters in science. I just landed my first job after 132 applications. I continued to attend therapy throughout the first 2 masters, and I'm doing so much better. I'm still a bit curvy, but really, there are worse things in life, and it's kind of adorable. Learning to play guitar. Wildly discouraging at first, with many opportunities to quit for somebody that has never picked up an instrument besides the elementary school recorder. Getting sober. There were days when all I could do was just take each minute at a time, crawling. But with time, the minute turned to an hour, then a day, then a couple of days, and so on and so forth, until I was running. I began opioid addiction treatment 2 days before my birthday. It's my hardest fought battle, but also the greatest gift I ever gave myself. I'll be 5 years clean in 3 months. My goal is to be more confident in my appearance. I'm slowly learning to love and believe in myself. I'm not there yet, but when I get there, I'll be living my best life. Over the last 2 years, I've lost both grandpas, a childhood friend, an old family friend, and a daughter. Her twin was stuck in the NICU for 4 months. That started at the beginning of COVID. Only my wife was allowed to see my daughter, and I was stuck at home with a 1-year-old and a 9-year-old, both on the spectrum. I became so stressed and depressed, I put on that COVID weight and pretty much became a sloth. I never had the motivation to get up and do anything. I quit my job, dropped out of school, wasn't sleeping, and the cycle of depression continued. Then I got a counselor. I just wanted to talk about the stress of the NICU and the preemie baby. That evolved into seeing a doctor about my weight and potential health issues. Turned out my circadian rhythm was off, my upper jaw is preventing my proper airflow, and I was showing early signs of Hashimoto's. From there, I started a new job where I walked a lot. I didn't lose weight, but I started to feel better about myself being active. So then I started exercising, 20 to 30 minutes a day. Now I walk about 8 to 10 miles at work, exercise for 45 minutes a day, eat healthy, and generally feel great about life. It's not much, but I was at my lowest point this year, and the only thing stopping me from not being alive anymore was my wife and kids. Now I'm working a great job I enjoy, I've lost 16 pounds since Thanksgiving, and my early signs of Hashimoto's have reduced significantly. I'm really proud of myself. They promised that this product would change everything, but it crashed and burned hard. Amazon's shopping buttons. They pushed really hard for those, and I never really saw the point. They even originally announced them on April 1st. They said it wasn't an April 1st joke, but I'm still skeptical. I saw plenty of social media posts from people saying, "Hey, this is a joke, but I kind of want it." And I think Amazon saw those and took a shot at making it a real product. I bought one for toilet paper and put it in the cabinet where I keep spare rolls. You take the last roll out and you press the button. It actually kind of worked. Crystal Pepsi, new Coke, orange juice, and toothpaste-flavored Lay's potato chips. And they even bought Crystal Pepsi back again a few years ago. The first bottle I loved. The second bottle, days later, I did not. I've never gotten tired of a soda so quickly before. Not entirely relevant, but I liked the trend where everybody wanted the smallest cell phone possible. For 20 years, cell phones got smaller and smaller, often being the main selling point of the phone. Then all of a sudden, you could watch videos on your phone, and almost overnight the trend reversed to larger is better. My friend, who studies medicine, had to install Second Life about 2 years ago for a class meeting? I don't get why they couldn't have used Skype, but okay. As a CS student, I wondered what the frick Second Life was doing on all of the lab PCs. I thought it was some kind of joke until people with PhDs started talking about how great of a collaboration tool it was. It wasn't. McDonald's pizza. Well, the issue here was time. The pizzas were actually a huge hit. The issue was how long it took them to cook relative to everything else. One person in a family orders a pizza and everyone else is done eating before the pizza was finished. My source? I'm a former slave to the Golden Arches. Soap shoes. These were kind of like normal shoes, but you could grind on rails with them via an indent in the sole. If you heard of these things from somewhere that wasn't Sonic Adventure 2, please tell me where. And please tell me where I can buy a pair. Oh, I had a pair of these. They were deadly around stairs. The indented arch was a slippery, smooth, hard plastic, and I never realized how much I placed the arch of my foot on the edge of each stair when descending them. Without fail, my first step on any stair would result in my foot shooting out from under me. Not for the first time, the narrator didn't quite believe this story at first, and then I googled them and voila, there were at one point shoes specifically designed with grinding down outdoor rails at the core of their design. Insanity. It will surprise nobody to know that they went down amidst a flood of lawsuits. Man, I remember as a kid seeing the Ninja Turtles and Dick Tracy use video comms and thinking it was so cool and wanting one for myself. And now if someone FaceTimes me, I have a panic attack. When someone video calls me, I stare at my phone thinking what they want and put my phone away. I'm not sure if this one has totally flopped yet, but I noticed while in Costco the other day that there are no longer any curved TVs. If Costco is no longer carrying them, then I think I can assume that they're going the way of the dodo. I mean, they're great for monitors. At the focal point, they reproduce colors better than a flat monitor. These screens are small enough, relatively speaking, that you can only have one person truly at the focal point. Everybody else on the couch for a curved TV is getting a worse experience than if it were just flat. I read somewhere ages ago that Google was willing to try just about anything their R&D people put out there, and if it didn't look like it was going to be $1 billion return, they'd can it and move on. Also, a lot of things they cancel have features that end up in their mainstream projects, like the conversation view, mail categories, trip thing, snoozing from inbox. They're all just part of Gmail now. I was at a conference about 12 years ago. Google presented a trial they were running in Africa because there was still a very low percentage of smartphones and internet there. So they had a call-in service where people would call a number and ask for information in their local dialect. The operator would Google search it in English and translate the answer back to them into their native language. Wild. Minidisc. To be honest, they were great, and the satisfying mechanical click you'd hear whenever you shut the lid, man, I miss my minidisc. I gave it away to one of my high school buddies. Google Plus was supposed to be the answer to Facebook. That was a lesson on how not to handle hype. There was so much hype around Google Plus, it was infectious, but they refused to open it up to everyone and maintained a very hardline invite-only system. Even once hype had peaked and there was a notable decline, still they maintained a small invite-only system. I remember by the time they decided to open it up to everyone, the hype was well and truly dead and nobody bothered with it. They should have cashed in when the hype was high, but they, I assume, got greedy, thinking the hype would just infinitely increase and people wouldn't get bored waiting to get in. 3D TV. I heard a stat from one of the 3D TV manufacturers that the average number of pairs of 3D glasses sold per 3D television was a number very much smaller than 1. I think they were too embarrassed to actually tell everyone how tiny the attach rate was. MoviePass. Not that I didn't get my money's worth while it was around. I never watched more movies in a month than when I had that service. Such a horribly consumer-friendly concept that it was never going to work long-term. Unfortunately, after I ended my subscription, they signed me back up at least 2 more times without my consent. But I caught on and I cancelled before they got any more of my money. Ouya and microconsoles in general, to be honest. HD DVD. I still remember half the movies being blue and the others red. I worked at a Best Buy Future Shop at the time in home theater, and I remember all of the 30-minute conversations with customers about if they should buy a Blu-ray or an HD DVD. I worked for a Fry's Electronics at the time, and we had a whole section for HD DVDs that just really wouldn't budge, no matter how much we lowered the prices or had combo deals with Xbox. I think it really hurt HD DVDs that for the PS3, the Blu-ray player was built in, but for the Xbox, the HD DVD player had to be purchased separately as a periphery. If I recall correctly, the PS3 had a better built-in Blu-ray player than any standalone Blu-ray player at the time, and the PS3 was cheaper than those. The Dark Universe Cinematic Universe, starting with 2017's The Mummy. I can't think about that movie without remembering when they accidentally released an incomplete trailer. Best movie trailer ever. Vine 2, now called Byte. They started making it a TikTok clone or vice versa, but TikTok won, so now it's like Reddit but with a TikTok for each subreddit. Quadraphonic entertainment systems in the early 1970s were supposed to replace stereophonic systems. Now they're chiefly remembered for inspiring the name of The Who's second rock opera. This one might be a bit obscure just because I've only ever met one other person familiar with it, but Google's Project Aura modular smartphone was looking like it could have been the be-all, end-all of smartphones. Based off the phone block's idea of having a Lego-like hot swappable module phone, the idea was that you could switch out any components of the phone on the fly. Camera, fingerprint scanner, even different quality screens. Conceptually, it really looked like it could take over the phone market, as it would lead to people not having to buy whole new phones anymore, but rather replacement or upgraded parts to a phone they already liked, thereby reducing costs and increasing utility. You don't want a phone with 5 cameras that inflates the cost unnecessarily? Just buy a 1-camera module. You want a 1440p Super AMOLED screen to replace your 720p regular screen? Buy one and swap it in. However, like many Google projects, it died off for a myriad reasons, and the long-standing era of $1,000 smartphone slabs lives on. Johnny Manziel. Second Life. In the beginning, companies even bought real estate in that program to allow people to visit them. So, like a lot of people, the narrator's only experience of Second Life was in that one episode of The Office. I can tell you the Second Life app and website is still there and it has a fairly big user base. I will say that since that spotlight on The Office, the graphics have simultaneously become more realistic but also closer to the uncanny valley. You have to see it to understand. This video is not brought to you by Second Life. Google Wave. It was supposed to replace email with a more collaborative approach. Essentially, it was like a dynamically created discussion board you'd share with select people, and you could have a more readable discussion than one with a bunch of forwards and CCs and the like. I thought it was a good idea, but it flopped big time and Google got rid of it after a few years. This was by far the best collaborative platform for planning trips I've experienced so far. I took a lot of backpacking trips, and we could all combine research, have a collected map, take stock of inventory, etc., all in one place. Now I see people putting that stuff into a Google Doc, and it kinda sucks by comparison. Rest in peace, Google Wave. Asbestos. Technically, it was a hit. Right up until it flopped when people figured out that the whole inhaling rock fibers is not healthy thing. Not to mention that asbestos is damn near indestructible. Its inability to be broken down is what was causing the health issues. The PT demo. Amazing how the demo for a cancelled product was so amazing that it's still remembered today, and it spawned its own PT-like genre. There are some really good horror games like Visage that wouldn't be here if not for a masterfully created short horror experience. Google Glass. I heard one of the biggest issues was that it was too heavy and felt uncomfortable, but they literally couldn't make it any lighter. That streaming service that lasted 2 months? Quibi, I think? Even bad timing aside, because it was a mobile-based streaming service released in 2020 when no one could really leave their house, its marketing was just horrible. I saw ads for it nearly a week before I realized it was a new video streaming service, and by that point I was just so annoyed by the ads that I didn't care at all, just out of spite. Also, it was just YouTube you had to pay for and got worse content. It felt like something an old person thinks young people want without doing any focus group testing. It probably could have survived, or at least died slower without the pandemic, but I don't think I'd have ever given them my money. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? Hoverboards. I remember a span of 3 months that everyone had them and showed them off, and then they just disappeared. And now, after further investigation, I discovered they were banned in my province a number of years ago. I always hated the fact that they were called hoverboards. Apparently a bunch of them burst into flames, which was, legally problematic. The Divergent series. It was supposed to kinda have a Hunger Games concept and all and try to be a replacement. The last 2 movies ended up being so unwatchable. Airship travel. These were the next awesome way to travel long distances. In fact, the spire on top of the Empire State Building was meant as an anchoring point for airships. The Hindenburg kind of put a damper on it, though. Hydrogen cars were a promising new form of motorized vehicle. They were supposed to be incredibly good for the environment, emitting only water as the exhaust. They exist, but not like how some people imagine. I was a pretty big hydrogen car believer way back when. There are some hydrogen stations, but mostly centered around California. The thing is that the hydrogen is quite expensive and not very efficient compared to smaller engines, hybrids, and electric vehicles. The hydrogen is also somewhat inefficient to produce, store, and distribute as well. You can actually get a hydrogen car though, they are out there. The Toyota Mirai is a really good example. Out of all hydrogen cars, that one's definitely the most popular. In fact, Toyota pays for $15,000 worth of hydrogen in your first few years of ownership, since it's so expensive. This means that for your first 3-ish years of owning one, you might not have to pay a penny for fuel. As you can see, I'm still a hydrogen advocate. Don't expect to be able to take it very far from your nearest station, though. Laserdiscs, the size of records. The US version of the UK TV show Coupling. It was peddled hard by NBC to be the next Friends when that show ended. If I recall correctly, there were interviews with the cast and they were already musing about the show going into multiple seasons. There was a big buzz since it was such a hit in the UK. It lasted 4 episodes. Segways were supposed to revolutionize travel and replace the automobile. Now they're just used for guided tours for dorks in tourist traps. Yep, this was going to be my one. The hype leading up to this was insane. Like a year of promising something that would challenge how cities were built. Nope, lots of places just made them illegal on public pavements and highways. If I recall correctly, a Chinese company bought Segway and used the tech to start making those electric scooters that are ubiquitous in cities now. Maybe it's an overblown urban myth that the narrator is perpetuating, but didn't the footage of George W. Bush stacking it on one of those things basically help in killing the product? You'd think for some kind of left-leaning parties that would have led to them investing. Next up, let's try and kill off all of these Google mentions with one big rambled list. Google Aardvark, the search engine, Google Base, Google Bieber Pay, Google Blog Search, Google Building Maker, Google Buzz, Google Checkout, Google Code Search, Google Directory, Google Express, Google Fast Flip, Google Flu Trends, Google Friend Connect, Google Goggles, Goog 411, Google Answers, Google Gesture Search, Google Trips, Google Plus, Google Helpouts, iGoogle, Google Image Labeler, Google Image Swirl, Inbox by Gmail, Google Insights for Search, Knoll, Google Labs, Google Latitude, Google Lively, Google Mashup Editor, Google Meebo, Google Moderator, Google News and Weather, Google Notebook, Google Offers, Orkut, Google PaySend, Picasa, Picnic, Google Questions and Answers, San Francisco Digital Inclusion Strategy, San Francisco Municipal Wireless, Google Schema, Google SearchWiki, Google Sidewalk, Google Spaces, Google Squared, Google Sync, Google Translator Toolkit, Google URL Shortener, Google Video, and Google Wave. Xbox Kinect. On the bright side, the Kinect ended up being a very inexpensive product, but an effective tool for computer vision and robotics research. As a big thing, it was a failure, but there was a lot of great niche uses for that product that never got explored. It's actually our loss that Kinect didn't last long just because it wasn't a major money mover. I worked in senior citizen services for a little bit, and when we got a Kinect, it revolutionized the place. It was shared with a few other SCCs, and we had it in Tuesdays, and a Microsoft guy would come in to help set it up and instruct the members. Our residents loved it. It was so great to watch them bowling and playing keeper in a soccer game or playing some of the simple little mini-games. Some of the seniors who would just sit there all day got up only for the Kinect. It was really nice. Sega's Dreamcast. It was Sega's best console since the Genesis, but they shot themselves in the foot with the 32X and Saturn. Even with the great games, they still got crushed by PlayStation because Sega's brand loyalty was dead. 3D TV. I had a friend in high school who was prepared to go to film school. She swore up and down that 3D TV was the way of the future, and one day all movies and TV shows would be in 3D. Seems to happen every 5 years or so, right? WeWork/WeLive. A classic case of something that was a good idea and actually at the right time, but was made to flop by being run into the ground by an unbalanced leader who was right about the ideas being timely and useful, but completely overselling it and taking a bunch of salivating venture capitalists down a primrose path. It also didn't help that so much of it was really a sham and almost a Ponzi scheme. It's not always about being the wrong idea or even the right idea at the wrong time. Sometimes it's just being led by the wrong person. Quibi. They spent so much money on a terrible advertising campaign that made me hate them instead of becoming intrigued by the concept. It was a decent idea in essence, but big corporations have to do better than that if they want to capitalize the gift economy of YouTube into something people pay for. Literally a product nobody asked for. Advertisers and producers were hyped for it, but the demographic that they wanted to reach was like, so it's TikTok, but it's 10-minute corporate-approved shows supported by ads, and you've walled the ads to be from only like 15 providers. Launching into 2020 should have been nothing but success, but they built something everyone wanted to sell and nobody wanted to buy. They couldn't even advertise it convincingly. The Wii U. It suffered from awful marketing. The advertisements made it look like it was some kind of add-on for the Wii instead of a separate console. Nintendo tried to use the Wii's massive success to sell more Wii U's that way, but they screwed up and should have had it branded as a separate product that wasn't connected to the Wii. At the time, video calling with your phone completely flopped because 3G couldn't support it. There was so much advertising about this thing that was meant to be huge, but the tech really didn't work yet. It did blow up later on with 4G, better phones, and Wi-Fi in more public spaces. Mixer, Microsoft's Twitch. It failed spectacularly. The Virtual Boy. Paperless office. Over and over again, our managers reminded us that we're working in a paperless office environment. Never happened in my very large company. I've not heard of paperless office in years now. Solar frickin' roadways. Dippin' Dots. It's been the ice cream of the future for like 40 years now, it seems. Also, I love Dippin' Dots. Who doesn't? But when you've been claiming your product is the future for nearly half a century, when is the future? They never could really find a way to transport and store them without the super cold freezers. They need something like -40 to keep, if I remember correctly, which is pretty intensive equipment for selling ice cream. During the pandemic, it got me thinking a bit. Don't the new COVID vaccines need something similar? Will we finally see Dippin' Dots take off because the infrastructure is coming around? Interesting thought. But not even that earth-shaking phenomenon could help them take off, it seems. How about those murder hornets? Everyone just kind of forgot about them. I don't think anyone forgot about them so much as it just became winter, so there wasn't as much to report. Actually, there wasn't that much to report in the first place, since they initially only found a couple in one area in northwest Washington. Then they found a nest, and that was reported. If people do forget about them, that's a good thing, since it means we were able to eradicate the population before it spread. Windows phones. Microsoft was so confident they'd bury the competition that they had a weird funeral procession for the iPhone. Man, one phone cycle I did have a Windows phone, and 2 new phones later, the Windows phone was still my favorite. I actually really liked it, but I left it like everyone else because it just didn't have the apps. Conversely, the narrator was also a Windows Phone early adopter, and to be blunt, it didn't go well, and I resented that horrible, freezing, unsupported piece of garbage right up until it finally just wouldn't turn back on one day. That fake fat that they put in chips in the 90s that made everyone poop their pants. I was on a Boy Scout camping trip when these were coming out. Someone walked around giving out free bags as a promotion. A bunch of young teenage boys getting a bag with a loose stool warning on it devolved into 24 to 48 hours of conversations about nothing but loose stool pretty quickly. Heroes. I still feel bad for Peter's Irish girlfriend who got permanently trapped in an alternate dystopia future due to the writers' strike. Star Wars: The Old Republic was supposed to be the World of Warcraft killer. It was honestly a good game, but they botched it on launch by having too many servers, leaving them all feeling vastly underpopulated, making what little endgame content there was worthless, since you couldn't find a group to do it with. Okay, I'm getting a lot of responses saying, a lot of games market themselves as the WoW killer, and this is true, but a lot of the hype wasn't coming from the marketing in this case, it was actually coming from players participating in the beta. And rightfully so, because the early game is solid and there was a good population on the beta servers. Jamarcus Russell. The Area 51 raid. Oh, let's be honest, that was either going to end with a bunch of random parties or a bunch of corpses. I'm just glad it ended with the former. The 2010 live-action Avatar: The Last Airbender movie. The European Super League. 2020. 2020 was going to be an ultimate year for partying, for Americans at least. It was 4/20, technically a whole month, Cinco de Mayo on Taco Tuesday, Independence Day on a Saturday, Halloween on a Saturday and a full moon and the end of daylight saving time, which meant 1 extra hour of Halloween partying, Christmas on a Friday, and finally New Year's Eve was on a Thursday, which meant the next year would begin with a 3-day weekend. This great combination happens when a leap year begins on a Wednesday. The previous time it happened was 1992, and it's not going to happen again until 2048. The dark truth about low-income life that middle-class kids could not handle. I learned that kids in some of these families have to help pay the bills. Learning that was rough. Inconveniences for normal people, like parking tickets, a malfunctioning fridge, a flat tire, these are potentially catastrophic for poor people with no financial cushions. Malfunctioning fridge is not just a repair expense, it can take out a week's groceries with it. It's not a joke. If I may, I grew up in the middle class until the recession of 2008. That's when both parents lost their jobs and we went to food stamps. I realized that vacations weren't things we took every year. Expensive toys couldn't be bought right then and there. We were lucky to have 3 meals a day, every day. My parents lost the house and we still haven't gotten back to where we were, but I do appreciate how hard my parents tried to provide everything for us. I grew up poor. When I went to prom, a rich girl in one of my classes gave me a dress. She knew my family's situation and just bought it to me in a bag a couple of weeks before the dance. I hemmed it, cut off the sleeves, and I was at home the day of the prom doing my hair, makeup, and nails myself. It shocked me that all the other girls were at salons. I was a punk and wore band tees and combat boots usually. I showed up to the prom looking really good. Everyone was shocked, and the principal even came over to me and commented on how I looked. I hated almost everyone at my school, but that night I felt like I belonged. I could share my experiences growing up poor too, like eating 2 pieces of bread with just mustard and ketchup on it for dinner. Or when my mum would beg the water company for just a few more days to come up with the money for the bill, but they'd shut off our water anyway. We'd use bottled water to bathe and brush our teeth. I'm what you'd call well off now, and I appreciate the heck out of everything I have and how far I've come. I'm glad that I grew up the way I did. I think it made me a better person. I'm not pretentious or judgmental, and I love helping other people out, because I can now. I'm really late to this, but here it goes. I didn't realize that some kids had to work to help their family pay the bills. I realized this at military boot camp. I joined the military because I failed out of college the first go round. My bunkmate got his first paycheck and told me how excited he was to send it to his parents so that they could pay their electricity bill. I got my first paycheck and I left it in my footlocker because I didn't have any other use for it. Later on, he told me he joined the military because he knew that the electricity would always be on. Yeah, the narrator met someone who's in a really high-end job now that basically sends all of his money home to his family. Even though I know this is a thing, it gives me pause to know that not everyone's parents are this reliable source of just free food and eternal caregiver dynamic outside of my little world. I always thought that people talking about their fridge being empty was an exaggeration. Like, there's plenty of food, just nothing you want to eat. Then I started dating a girl who didn't have a lot of money, and I opened the fridge door and I saw only Hawaiian punch and ketchup. And I was just like, well, crap. Those couple of days between the last shopping trip running out and my parents' next paycheck was the worst. Scrounging to put together a meal but always coming through, my mom was an angel. That many kids didn't eat lunch at school because there was no program or their family just didn't have the money or resources. Eating out at restaurants isn't common for everyone. My mum gave a girl on my basketball team a ride home from an away game. I can't remember what the reason was. We decided to grab a bite to eat and asked her if she had a preference. She picked a buffet place, saying that was where her family goes. Turns out it was the only restaurant she'd been to other than fast food from time to time. A few months later, she was with us at an Italian place that was slightly upscale, and she didn't know how to order, so my mum did it for her. For dessert, she asked for cherry cheesecake and then whispered to me that she'd just scrape the cherries off. I flagged down the server and had them change it to a plain cheesecake. I felt so sorry for her because she was just uncomfortable. I also realized I was pretty spoiled and I appreciated my parents so much more after that. I hated going to restaurants with friends when I became old enough to go because my family literally never ate out, so I didn't know what to do. I'd get really panicky placing an order and I'd never know the etiquette for, say, asking for a refill or stuff. My husband, funnily enough, has the opposite problem and used to freak out when he has to go on public transportation. That all your brothers and sisters sometimes sleep on the same bed or on the floor. That some families are so poor their children only went to school for the free food. In some places, there are programs to feed those children during school holidays because they usually only get a meal at school. I went to private school and there was a girl that I assume was on a scholarship or financial aid, and she always smelled real bad. I saw her putting on deodorant in the bathroom once, and I guess I must have stared a second too long because she told me that she didn't have anything clean to wear because her mum didn't have money for the laundromat that week. I couldn't believe that people had to wear dirty clothes until they could go to the laundromat. I just thought everyone had a washing machine in their house. A high school by me recently added a laundry room for students to use if they had a need. They can talk to the coordinator, move loads between classes, and have clean clothing available by the end of the day. That the kids doing bad at school weren't always bad students or lazy. They didn't have enough to eat, they were malnourished, and they couldn't concentrate. I was so poor as a kid that the week of the month that the government cheese block was delivered was exciting for me, and horribly depressing when the cheese ran out, because it meant 3 more weeks of no cheese. It was exciting because everything else I ate was so bad that this cheese was delicious and the only real highlight in my life at that point. That you could reach adulthood without ever learning to read. I had a McJob where one guy wouldn't date and label the food he prepped. Turns out he wasn't just cutting corners, he didn't know how. It blew my mind that not only would the school system let him reach adulthood without teaching him to read, but that he could function in today's society with only knowing a handful of written words. I dated a girl that was from a very rich family, and she'd never turn lights off when she left any room. I'd walk around the house and turn lights off, and she just didn't understand why. I'll share the story that woke me the F up. I was a manager on a PC refresh, where we had employees out in the field. Since they were traveling, one of their perks was that we gave them $50 a day for food, and all they had to do was send in their receipts. I was approving receipts for the week, and I noticed that one of our employees had only submitted a receipt for $25. So I called him to make sure he understands how the reimbursement process worked, and to ask for the rest of his receipts, which were typically around $300 a week. He told me that all he bought for the week was bread and bologna since he didn't have the money to front the expenses, which is why the receipt was so low. I was floored, and that's when I started to realize what it means to not have any savings or access to credit. Needless to say, we fronted him the money the next week. My boss asked me to buy a $50 part out of pocket the other day, and that he'd pay me back when I got back to work. And I was thinking, damn, if we hadn't just gotten paid, I would have had to tell him I couldn't buy it. Luckily, I got to avoid that awkward interaction. It rather isn't a case of not believing, but one of having no awareness. I heavily underestimated how deep-rooted the cancellation, sorry, can't, no money, goes. For me, financial refusals always meant that I'd rather spend it on other amenities. No international vacation for me because I want that fancy bag or coat or something. Or let me rephrase precisely, I have money, just alternate investment priorities. I'm by no means rich, just normal middle class and only child rich. But I took far too long for the realization that someone who doesn't have enough money to partake in something had made frustrating calculations leading up to that, and probably endured a lot of disappointing cancellations before. You don't just get up and go to the doctor when you're sick or for a yearly physical. Yes, here in the US. A good friend sums it up for me. Doctors are for rich people here. The narrator is about to go to the States again, and although there's a lot to love about it, one thing that always makes me feel sick to my stomach is the sheer scale of homeless and addicted people who clearly need medical help, contrasted by all the private ambulances prowling around looking for their next multi-thousand-dollar semi-willing customer. Gross. I didn't have a concept of kids not having new clothes, toys, and electronic devices. The idea of something being pre-used I thought only came from yard sales, and you didn't have to get things that way. It was just better off because they often had toys that you couldn't find at a store. The idea of going to bed hungry, I thought it only happened in third world countries. I'd seen homeless people, but I believed they were alcoholics. In general, anyone struggling for the basics of life, I just really didn't understand. My school had a breakfast program for kids who were less well off, and I thought they just went out there to hang out with their friends or their parents were too lazy to make them breakfast. I didn't understand why some kids couldn't go on field trips. Family vacations just seemed normal to me. I think the worst part of it all was believing my family was actually poor. Sure, we didn't have the newest toys or electronics as soon as they came out, and our clothes did come from Walmart, and we were never out of the country for a vacation. My parents were always complaining about not having any money for bills and things they wanted to do, but as I got older I realized they just didn't manage their money well. We lived in a house that they owned, we had enough food that a lot of it went bad, had mountains of toys and a lot of video games, and we were generally getting $500 to $700 worth of new things each Christmas. Living on my own with no financial support from them has taught me a lot, and I'm grateful about that. I just wish I had understood this growing up so I knew how lucky I was. I thought people on food stamps were people trying to game the system. Now I'm an adult on food stamps and it's the only way I can make ends meet. We get so much stigma and hate. The other day someone posted on Facebook about people on food stamps having $600 phones. I have an Obama phone and it doesn't work half the time. Just how little some people are paid. When I was younger, I figured that approximately $40,000 a year was the lowest someone could possibly earn. That people used credit cards because they didn't have the money at the time, instead of a convenient way to earn points by paying cards off in full each month. I learned this after moving away from university. Turns out loan payments and paychecks don't always come in at convenient times. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? I have no idea how a person's able to support themselves. I thought I knew everything coming out of high school. What I found out was that I lived in a super small bubble. I have friends that don't have parents who grew up essentially homeless and are doing amazingly well for what they've come from. A lot of this revelation was also attributed to me moving out as well. When I got to college, I realized that some students were paying their own way. That was humbling. I wasn't exactly from a rich family, but I couldn't get my mind around that. That some people can't afford to fill up their car with petrol. I loved when I used to read articles of money-saving tips hoping for something new to me. When they started out with a save $5 a day by cutting out pricey coffee drinks, I knew I could just close the tab, because if I had $5 to spend on coffee every day, I sure as heck wouldn't be walking to work the last 3 days of every pay period because I was out of gas. That was a few years and a couple of jobs ago. I no longer struggle to buy gasoline. That not everybody has a passport. People give Americans crap for this, but it's pointless to have one if you're so poor you'll never be able to leave the country anyway. From the flip side, when I was in college, I actually lost friends because I couldn't afford to do the activities they did, like going to bars every weekend or going to multiple concerts or raves or festivals over the summer. It was partly about not having the money and partly about not being able to take time off work. It was embarrassing to be 20 and tell other 20-year-olds I couldn't afford what they took for granted. So I'd tell them I didn't like bars or I didn't like raves. They took that to mean I didn't like them. I had to tell one of my friends that I just couldn't take off on a plane, which I'd never been on, to go to New York City with her to see the ball drop. I've worked straight through what would be considered Christmas break. In fact, I'm taking the next semester off so that I can work full-time. I can't get by on a part-time retail check. I don't have mum and dad's money to pay for my rent, car insurance, gas, phone bill, or groceries. She wants me to go to Canada with her this summer, and I'm wondering where I'll get money to buy a passport. That you could actually try really hard and still not get hired for a better job. I grew up thinking that if people just tried harder, they'd get a better situation. I had no idea that so much is stacked against people living in poverty, that most live $200 from insolvency, where a fender bender can result in losing transportation, which can result in losing a job, which results in losing where you live. I went to high school in a nearby city and befriended a friend who lived in the projects. She lived with 3 grandparents, 2 aunts, her mother, 2 sisters, and herself in an incredibly small 2-bedroom, 3rd-floor walk-up. I didn't think people lived like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory family, but this family did. They all shared beds, and the grandparents stayed in the bed in the living room 90% of the time. I hope that they at least didn't have a Grandpa Joe staying in that little Roald Dahl arrangement. Oh, who am I kidding? Someone that selfish and deceitful probably wouldn't be allowed in the house by their family. When he was growing up, my dad had 2 shirts and 2 pairs of pants. When he was wearing one, he hand-washed the other. Then he spent his whole life making sure his kids and grandkids would have more than he had. Thanks, Dad. It's not something I disbelieved, just something I didn't know or understand. That it's a matter of course that they make sacrifices in order to help their friends, family, and community members. I used to advise at a community college with a largely impoverished student population. Every now and then, a student would tell me a story that boiled down to something like, I didn't get to study for the final exam the night before because my neighbor's car broke down and I had to give him a ride to work. I was baffled by how often I'd heard something like that. In my world, you'd apologize to your neighbor and say you absolutely have to study for the exam tonight. But I eventually learned that when you grow up in poverty, you help that neighbor because you don't know when you might need their help. Looking out for number one is not how you survive in that world. Or rather, looking out for other people is how you look out for number one as well. Eating squirrels is an actual thing. My family used to subsistence hunt. Squirrel was one of those animals you could always count on there to be a lot of. First time I cooked a squirrel for my wife, she thought I was joking. She had grown up feeding cute little squirrels in the park. No, this wasn't in the South. Why is everyone assuming I'm in or from the South? My mom used to hunt for our dinners when I was a kid. Squirrel, rabbit, pheasant, deer, ducks. I'm sure we ate stranger crap too that she didn't tell us. I grew up dirt poor in the country. Things middle-class people didn't believe included that people don't live in single wides because they like it, they do it because it's all they can afford. Out in the sticks, a double wide with good underpinning is middle class. Having a garden is not a whimsical thing that people do for kicks, it can be the only way that you eat decent vegetables. A space heater is how you stay warm, when keeping the trailer heat on will result in a $400 utility bill, and that's more than rent or trailer mortgage. I learned to shoot a firearm at 12 because I had to help put food on the table. A single deer is good meat for a long time. There are people who are one generation removed from outhouses, if they haven't actually used one. If there's a snowstorm, canning keeps you alive because the power will be out for 2 weeks sometimes. My grandmother literally fed 10 people one winter for a week and a half. People join the military in relatively high numbers because it's the easiest way out of crushing poverty, or about the only way they're going to college. In the UK, I've genuinely encountered people from wealthy rural backgrounds who genuinely thought that house numbers were only an American thing, and that every house in Britain had a name. I'd hate to be a postman if that were the case. I ride horses, and I was shocked to learn that one of my friends had never been on a horse before. Her response was, "Horseback riding in America isn't a poor person thing. I live in suburban Florida, and yes, now I know just how correct they were." I grew up in a middle-class home, and I'm now a teacher in a Title I, aka a lower-income high school. I always knew that there were people who were less fortunate, but my first year of teaching has been a real eye-opener. 5 to 7 kids sit in my room during lunch every day, and I noticed that one student either didn't eat or had a Coke and hot Cheetos. I learned that he only sometimes had lunch money, and if he did, it was only $2 or $3. This December, many students didn't have enough warm clothes, and of that portion, most walk a mile or more to and from school. Many don't have the money for school supplies, let alone lab fees. Only some classes have lab fees, mine don't. I bought big boxes of granola bars and paper binders and stuff to give the kids whenever they need them, but as a fresh-from-college 22-year-old with $45K in debt, there's only so much I can do. It sometimes breaks my heart, but I hope being a good teacher and mentor helps them in ways that money can't. Not something I couldn't believe, but something I didn't really realize. The temperature of the house is strictly controlled in the houses of lower-income people that I know.
When I was a kid, I'd turn the heat up to 80 and set the AC at 65.
I'm horrified to remember that I used to love drying my hair in winter when I was 15 by cranking the thermostat to 85 and putting a towel down by the baseboard heating vent. I'd lie down on the towel and fan out my hair in front of the vent. The warm air was like being at the beach, and I'd read a book as my hair air-dried or until my dad got home and flipped out by how hot it was indoors in February. It never occurred to me that heat cost money, just that my dad was always too hot and liked cooler temperatures than we did.
My God, I'm only realizing now that my childhood consisted of worrying about basic needs, which is actually a completely alien concept to well-off people.
This realization when you first have it is insane. Wait, living off of instant mashed potatoes wasn't normal? That knowing from where and when money is coming is very important. I thought you just had money to buy or pay the thing and you can just use the next paycheck to pay yourself back. This is why I think it's a good thing for parents with the means to give an allowance or money for chores. They actually take the opportunity to ingrain in their kids that this money isn't going to last forever and they need to prioritize it. Once you spend your pocket money, it's gone. For all that I had a pretty privileged upbringing, we learned to hoard our weekend money like greedy little gremlins in my family. What it meant to not be able to afford something, or to be broke. My parents would say, "Oh, we can't afford that." But it really meant we'd rather spend that $1K on ourselves or on our next vacation or whatever instead of on a new toy or computer or phone for you.
"Oh, we're broke, sweetie,"
meant we've used too much money in our checking account. We'd still have saving accounts and investments, of course, so no money really just meant no more money that we'd be spending right now. Because I grew up this way, I viewed money as something that just magically never ran out. I'd really get annoyed when my friends would say, "I can't afford that," or "I'm broke," as a reason for not doing something because I viewed it as an excuse instead of a reality. The first time as an adult when I literally couldn't afford something because the $50 check I'd deposited hadn't gone through and so my debit card was declined was a surreal and horrible feeling. I suddenly understood what "I'm broke" and "I can't afford that" really meant. Well, my dad grew up extremely poor, and because of this he worked very hard to make sure we were middle class and that myself and my siblings were better off than he was. The one story he always told us that I almost couldn't believe was that in school, can't remember what grade level or how old he was, but he had an art assignment to draw his favorite pair of shoes. He didn't have a favorite pair, he only had one pair of sneakers that he had for over a year. They were ratty and gross, but that's all his family could afford. He was embarrassed and didn't do the project, and his teacher pointed it out in class. So my dad just walked up to his desk, took a shoe off and placed it on the teacher's desk, and just said, "That's why." My teacher didn't know what to say, so my dad took off his shoes and sat back down. That story always blew my mind and made me realize how lucky I was since I didn't have to worry about where my shoes were coming from. That actually I now drive my mum crazy because I make sure to use my shoes and other clothes as long as I can, even though they're extremely old, but it makes me feel a little better knowing I'm using things to the fullest rather than until they're out of season or anything like that. The worst helicopter parenting fails that will leave you speechless. My first roommate in college had a helicopter mum whose helicoptering frankly bordered on terrifying. You see, he was born deaf. She never allowed him to learn sign language because she'd always be there to protect him, and he needs to live a normal life, not a deaf life. Her words, not mine. He was pretty good at lip reading and could vocalize remarkably well given how profound his hearing loss was. She pulled me aside and very seriously asked me to inform her anytime he talked to a girl. She said he has problems with girls trying to take advantage of him. She insisted he say good night to her every night, which meant he had to be on instant messenger, and deaf so he couldn't call without using a specialized typing phone. He needed to call her for at least an hour every night or else she'd call our room phone in a panic looking for him. I teach high school and occasionally college. One IEP meeting for a high school student, the mother mentioned her other kid was enrolled at a local university and that she, the mother, was also enrolling in the same classes to ensure her daughter did her work. Facepalm. And kind of unrelated, but I find it funny, by pure chance my mum and my brother were enrolled in the same class this term at university, and my mum was super adamant that my brother not embarrass her during the class. I worked as an instructor at a karate school, and there was one parent no one wanted to deal with. Her son was in our 10 to 13-year-old class. The school had a little waiting area where parents could watch their kids, mainly used for the 4 through 6-year-old class, and she'd sit in the waiting area staring at her son. One class we were doing very light contact drills, no more than a poke, and she came out onto the floor and started yelling at me for putting her son in danger. I asked her to please leave the floor. I changed the drill to no contact, and she ran onto the floor yelling at me for singling her kid out. I stopped the class and told her to speak with the head instructor. She left to talk to him, and I looked over at the kid, and he was crying. I quickly moved to a fun drill, and he started to smile. When the class ended, a few other parents came up to me and said, "That mum is nuts," and she kept trying to come to the kids' classes. In short, mum signed her kid up for karate and didn't want him to be in a contact sport. I was at college orientation, and one parent came up to my friend and said, "That girl over there is my daughter. You go up to her and introduce yourself to her and be her friend." It wasn't done in a cute way, it was semi-threatening. College. So effectively saying this to other adults. I mean, you only get a taste of the sheer crazy that the poor girl had to go through every day of her life up to that point. I just hope that some of these kids get better at limiting contact and setting boundaries as they stay away from home more. When my niece was 14 or so, her mother, my sister-in-law, was so far up her butt that I'm not sure the kid actually ever spoke for herself. One day, my niece was in the bathroom and she took a little too long to finish, so her mother stood outside the door and said, "What's taking you so long? Are you wrapping the toilet paper around your hand like I showed you? Do you need me to come in there and show you again? Why is this door locked? Open this door." It was Thanksgiving dinner and the whole family just stared at my sister-in-law in shock. We could all hear my niece crying in the bathroom. That woman is a frickin' psychopath. Some guy I know wanted to move out from his control freak mum at age 23 or so. She kept complaining about the places he was looking at to rent. Eventually, she decides it's just better if she buys an apartment and lets him rent it from her just to make sure everything's in order. However, she couldn't quite afford it, so she involves the ex-husband, even if the dude said explicitly that he wanted nothing to do with her plan. I don't know all the details, but that's how he ended up anyway. She has a key to his place, and yes, she uses it to check on the place every time he's out of the apartment, and she even leaves small presents for him just to let him know that she was in there. I played a lot of hockey as a kid. I had a plate of nachos and drink thrown at me by a mother, and was challenged to a fight by the father of one of the kids on the other team. The reason being I scored twice that game, and he was the goalie, and apparently there were scouts there. There weren't, we weren't that good. Keep in mind that I was about 400 kilometers from home and staying with my team at a hotel, and this was in the arena lobby after the game while watching the next game. Man, hockey parents are the worst. There was this guy on my team whose dad would routinely get kicked out of rinks, which forced a penalty on our team. There's no kid in any sport who thinks, "Yeah, Dad, you get him," when their father is acting like a petulant 4-year-old in the stands. An old neighbor of mine was notorious for being clingy to her daughter. Really, one of those mums who tries to live vicariously through her kid. Daughter is now a junior in high school. Mum bought them identical phones, cases, and set identical backgrounds so that nobody would know when one had the other's phone. Mum would take daughter's phone and text daughter's boyfriend pretending to be her. "I love you," "I want to be together forever," etc. Even some of the daughter's friends have caught mum texting them pretending to be the daughter. I feel like that's more like a vampire parent than helicopter. Parents going on job interviews with their kid. Happens all the time. Same with medical school interviews. I had a girl come in for a job interview with her mum. Neither introduced themselves properly, and the mum wouldn't shut up about how perfect her daughter was. I had my supervisor do the full interview with the girl while I talked to the mother. I told the mum straight, "You are ruining your daughter's chances at getting hired at any job." She got offended, and I clarified, "If your daughter can't show up to work without her parent making her, it doesn't make her look like a reliable employee." She was offended anyway, and damn right we didn't hire that girl. I went to primary school with a kid whose parents were Italian immigrants. His mum would come to the school gate every lunch and give him pasta and make him sit there and eat it all in front of her. Authentic Italian food every day for lunch? Sounds good to me. I knew a kid who wouldn't be allowed to take his Lego sets apart even years later. I don't think his mum understood the point of Legos. I knew a kid who only got to assemble his Lego sets once and under tight supervision from his mom. Every piece had to be the same as in the instructions. In the end, they superglued them together. Frickin' brutal. I really hope they eventually watched the Lego movie together. A friend of mine turns 19 in a month. He can't hang out past 7 o'clock, his parents won't let him get a phone, even though they aren't in any financial troubles that we know of, and worst of all, they won't let him get a job until he turns 21. He's afraid to talk to people from how much they shelter him. It's actually pretty sad. Forgot to mention his parents won't let him go get his license either. He has his temps, but they refuse to take him driving anywhere. He took the test once and failed because he got 30+ points off because they won't teach him how to drive. My mum was a grade 1 teacher. One year she had this trouble kid who wouldn't be quiet during lessons, was rude to other kids and teachers, all around a little bag of crap. But his mother, well, his mother was far worse. She wouldn't believe anyone but her son about anything, and this kid knew how to play his mum like a fiddle. While he was a hellspawn at school, he acted all shy and victimized when his mum was around. They had meetings pretty much every other week. My mum, his mum, and eventually the principal got involved as well. But no matter what they told his mum, "No, my son is perfect. He's an angel. He'd never do any of that." "What? He hit another kid in the face and made him bleed and there were 30 witnesses, including 3 teachers and 2 parent volunteers? He'd never do something like that. You all must have seen it wrong." This kid caused so much stress to my mum that year. First off, no, the kid's name isn't Eric Cartman. Even Cartman would be better than that because at least he's entertaining. Second, to answer some questions about providing proof, the mother wouldn't hear any of it. She was convinced not only that her son was an angel, but also that the school was plotting against them. I did talk to my dad. My mum had passed away in 2005 from unrelated circumstances, and he said eventually his mother did get the wool pulled off from over her eyes. But it took practically 2 years to do it. I'd forgotten that my mum taught kindergarten the previous year, and guess who was in that class? No, their method wasn't recording him on videotape, because something about other kids being recorded in classrooms required permits and paperwork. Catholic school morality and anti-money spending crap, I don't know. But what they did do was arrange for the mother to witness his behavior in person without him being aware that she was even there. She witnessed him tackling a kid to the ground unprovoked and throwing a clump of dirt and grass at a teacher that separated them. My dad says my mum's favorite moment was seeing how wide the mother's eyes went when she saw it, followed by how much more wide her son's eyes got when he saw his mum walking out to him. Well, although it does sound like it took way too long for her to come around, I think that some of the others we've heard about today wouldn't even believe it if they saw it. Some awful people can watch those they care about commit literally everything wrong in front of them and still find a way to blame it on someone else. My roommate in college would not do his laundry ever until his mum came to do it for him every couple of months. He had tons of clothes and would basically just start piling them up in the closet as he wore them. Then his mum would come in and basically monopolize the dorm laundry facilities for 3 hours, doing all of his laundry. I didn't know her, just said hi a couple of times in passing. One time I came back and all of my laundry was done too and put away. And she folded my underwear? Folded? I was kinda creeped out, but then, hey, clean laundry. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? When I was 14, my dad took me to France on vacation. We didn't have a ton of money, but he had gotten a really great deal on the airfare, so we decided to just go with the 2 of us. This is until my dad started dating this lady a few weeks before we left, so he ended up inviting her. She in turn brought her 14-year-old daughter, who was very cute. Score, right? Not at all. First off, it was a long flight and we were missing 2 weeks of school, so the both of us, myself and I believe her name was Sarah, we had a ton of schoolwork. So we of course had both independently planned to get it all done on the flights so we wouldn't have to do anything during the trip. Well, to be clear, I planned to do my work. Apparently, Sarah had planned to have her mum do hers. I crap you not, her mother spent the entire 10-hour flight doing her daughter's homework for her. And I don't mean helping, I mean actually sitting there doing the work, while Sarah listened to her headphones and screwed around. I believe it was at this point that my dad realized he'd made a series of serious compounding errors here. First, getting involved with this woman. Second, inviting her along on our one and only international vacation ever. And third, allowing her to bring her irredeemable super witch of a daughter along. Sarah refused to carry her own luggage. And she had a lot of it too. We ended up sharing the load between the 3 of us while she had only her carry-on. Any attempt to be nice to her generally resulted in a "shut the F up" from Sarah. Her mum heard every one of her cuss words and said nothing. If we stopped to see a sight, Sarah wasn't interested and she'd just wander off and then we'd have to go hunting for her. The most her mum would say was, "Sarah honey, please stay with us," to which Sarah would respond with some vulgarity that her mother would again ignore. Basically, there was nothing she wouldn't complain about, not a thank you to be had ever, and I've never heard the F word from a 14-year-old as often before or since. On our 4th day, we decided to eat dinner on a floating restaurant on the Seine. As with most establishments in Paris, this one had a small dog that ran around. Sarah, in her infinite wisdom, decided to feed the dog from the table. She was feeding it basically everything she could. Bread, cooked fish and cream sauce, you name it. At one point I said, "Sarah, you shouldn't feed the dog that stuff, it's not good for—" "Mind your own effing business." My dad looked at me and I knew he was trying to telepathically apologize for the situation. At this moment, however, karma took over. We began hearing this hacking noise from under the table, followed by the clear and unmistakable sound of a small dog throwing up. It did so all over Sarah's feet. She started screaming and crying, of course. She was wearing sandals, and the throw-up was inside her shoes. We couldn't help ourselves. My dad and I started laughing so hard we could barely breathe. We sat there laughing ourselves nearly into a coma while the mother frantically tried to calm the daughter, and the restaurant staff kind of stood there in shock. The mum, of course, couldn't believe we were laughing and was indignant towards our behavior. She yelled at my dad, who responded with something like, "That was the best thing to happen this whole trip," and then continued laughing. My dad put them on a plane the next morning and sent them home. We spent the next 10 days, just the two of us, traveling down the Loire Valley over to Belgium and Germany. We had a wonderful time, and it's one of the best memories of growing up with my dad. I've been in and worked at a university for the past 10 years or so. To me, the worst examples aren't the incredibly hyper-controlling parents around lower, middle, or high school age. Those parents can be absolutely ridiculous, don't get me wrong, but when the kid is still living under their roof, I can understand being involved. For me, the absurd ones are the ones that continue helicoptering once the kid gets to college. A few things I've seen in my years here: parents calling professors to complain about their kid's grades or how their kid was graded. I've seen this all the way up to graduate students. Parents demanding our registrar change their kid's schedule at their request because they're paying tuition. A parent demanding our registrar change their kid's major at their request because, again, they're the ones paying tuition. This mother demanded that her son be a biomedical engineering major instead of a computer science major. And parents sitting in their kids' classes on the first day with their kids and going up to talk to the professor afterwards. I mean, I can understand sitting in the back of one of your kids' first really big classes just to get a feeling for what they're going to be doing, but sitting with them and actually participating? Oh my god. Fortunately, the law and our school are adamant about this. Administrators and professionals are to reply, "By law, we can't discuss this with anyone except the student," to everything. But half the time that just ticks the parent off even more because, after all, I'm paying tuition. He'll take what I want him to take. My parents were pretty bat-crap crazy about parenting. As I got older, they got more and more crazy. They wouldn't let me move out to go to uni at 18, so I ended up living at home. They wouldn't let me date. They'd have crazy arguments and occasionally get physical with me if they discovered I'd spoken to a boy. They limited my time on the internet, confiscated my phone, even after I was an adult, and paid for the phone myself. Last year I left home and they called the police reporting me missing and wasted a lot of police time. They turned up at my boyfriend's house 4 hours away where I was staying. We had to call the police who escorted us away somewhere safer. They constantly hounded me with calls and texts. I went to see them 2 months later and they locked me into my old bedroom and my boyfriend had to call the police again so I could leave without them hurting me. I went back in February to collect clothes and some belongings and had to have the police escort me there. I'm glad I did, because they decided to have a huge family gathering and wanted to ambush me when I got there. I saw them once in June when they came to see me. I didn't let them know where I lived and I met them for half an hour in the park and stuff got seriously nasty again, so I left. Interesting in a number of ways. For one, this is maybe our only first-hand account so far, but I think the far more interesting aspect is that these guys got worse as you aged, rather than simply continuing to treat you as the baby they always saw you as. Good on you for knowing how and when to GTFO. Speaking as a teacher, so many. Especially when I was teaching pre-kindergarten. One mum wanted to pay for us to have cameras in our center so she could see what her kid was doing throughout the day. I said no. She decided she'd visit our school 4 times a day instead. Once for drop-off, before nap, after nap, and pick-up. Kid on my youth hockey team wasn't allowed to get dressed in the locker room. His parents made him dress in gear at home and then ride, in the backseat only, to the game. More details: my parents were friendly with his parents, so every once in a while I'd have to catch a ride with them if my parents couldn't take me, and I wasn't allowed to dress in the locker room either. This wasn't a case of embarrassment or transgender stuff, as I remembered him asking to be allowed in the locker room. Just a case of overprotection from being the only child, I guess. This continued into middle school. I worked at a dining hall in college, and one parent called our manager to complain that her son wasn't getting big enough pieces of chicken in his General Tso's. Sorry your little boy isn't getting enough protein to grow up big and strong like his dad. I work for the help desk at a university, and I get disgusted with some of the parents that call in. Most of the time, they wanted me to give them Junior's password so that they can see his homework, grades, and classes. We have a separate login system for financial aid-related stuff, but these parents want to have the full password. Some things I've heard include, but are not limited to, but I'm paying for him to be there, so I should have access.
I am his mother, and I need to know what he's up to.
I just want to make sure he's taking the right classes. Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to tell these people to cut the umbilical cord, but I can't give them the password either. I've been yelled at a few times. Just to make a point, I've never had a father call in and ask for this. I've had hundreds of mothers, though. My aunt gives my 8-year-old cousin a walkie-talkie when he goes a couple of houses over to his friend's house to play. She then sits on her front porch and checks in every minute or two. It's hilarious. One day, some years ago, I got the following email out of the blue. Hi Stephen, your parents sent me a package with your information and pictures and a letter saying they wanted to set us up. As flattered as I am, I'm in a committed relationship right now. I'm also only 21 years old and I'm not looking to get married or have children anytime soon, which your parents made clear was your intention. I'm sorry, but this isn't something I'm interested in. I wish you good luck in your endeavors. Yes, my parents did that, seriously.
Are you Indian? Because my parents did this too.
My fiancé had a friend in college who was obscenely rich and got packages like that all the time from families trying to arrange marriages with him. He'd get expensive jewelry and all kinds of gifts with notes saying, "Please consider my daughter for marriage." So my fiancé would mess with him by buying knickknacks from the dollar store, packaging them and leaving them in his mailbox with notes that said,
"Please consider her name for marriage. Enclosed is a small novelty squirt gun."
She'd address the packages and notes as if they came from her parents. Okay, it's not as bad as some of these, but I once got a phone call from a parent screaming at me asking why her daughter wasn't allowed to swim in a competition coming up that weekend. She wouldn't let me get a word in to explain that I was not, in fact, her daughter's swim coach. I'm not a swim coach at all. Her coach had the same name as me and was even the same age, but still lived with his parents. So mine was the only phone number in the phone book with my name. This was over 10 years ago. She went on for about 5 minutes explaining that she watches all of the kids swimming and her daughter was definitely the strongest in her group. I was so mad, I simply agreed and told her that her daughter would definitely be swimming this weekend. She congratulated me on making the right decision and hung up. I really wish I could have seen what happened. Just a few months ago, while I was working my custodian job at my school's student union, a worried mum approached me. She told me she had lost her daughter and that she was lost. She tried calling her and she didn't answer. I took it very seriously and asked her where she was supposed to be. She said at one of the dorms. Eventually, the daughter calls and said she's separated, and the mum tells me she's scared and alone. We leave the union building in search of her daughter and we arrive at the dorm. I then begin to notice that it's full of group leaders and new students, and it clicks that her daughter is 18 years old and the mum was overreacting. I just wasted 20 minutes helping a way too worried mum find her college-age daughter. I really thought a little kid was lost. I blame working retail prior to this job. In short, mum told me her kid was lost, but kid was a freshman. One of my friends has to call his parents every single day, dutifully, and describe how his day was. One time, he couldn't call the parents due to no network. And the next day, his parents sent him on a guilt trip saying how irresponsible he was and how his mother was worried sick. He'll turn 32 now and oddly seems to be okay with all of this. Every time he's troubled, he expects daddy's help. My aunt hasn't let my cousin, who's 11, go to any birthday parties besides his own or go to any parks because she's afraid he'll get sick from the other kids. Also, he still sleeps with my aunt and uncle in their bed. Wait, The Office wasn't fiction? Real Michael Scott bosses exposed. My first boss in America, I was 21. He was Asian American. I'd never seen The Office, but I noted the absurdity. He'd get free potato chips from a guy in a company truck and would stuff his cheeks in the middle of telling me what to do. He always offered me some, though. He fired a coworker for screaming some racist stuff at me by just yanking her out the door, called another coworker a cub or a baby lion because she was tiny with wild, unruly hair, would do a small mini roar whenever she was about to report for her shift or when I mentioned her name. He ran around the place with a wig on his head imitating me, brought his daughter to work and gave her piggyback rides in the office. He'd ask me to take videos. He'd talk to black people in a black way. He'd say, "What's up, shorty?" to the ladies, and "What's poppin'?" Called the guys Tyrone and would say, "Sheer," well, you know what, we can't say it on YouTube, in his most convincing black voice. It was actually pretty good. He'd ask me to teach him random Arabic words so he could yell them sporadically in the middle of the day. You know, he always got the accent right. He had an open-door policy and would do shots in his office. Started a small chicken farm in the back of the building and would give out whole chickens to the staff. He had me and a coworker try to slaughter one time. I couldn't and just nicked it a little bit and shrieked, spraying all three of us with blood. Received a visit from the city people to tell him he couldn't keep chickens in the back. He was rounding the main floor with a small basket of freshly laid eggs just as they were asking him. He did do the chicken farm again the next summer, this time with a small garden growing squash, cucumber, and corn to disguise the chicken coop. Happily gave out vegetables along with more chickens. He'd be extremely proud of taking home a tray of his eggs to his children. Ate 2 fresh eggs every morning. He brought a wok to work to deep fry sausages in. Sometimes he made lunch in the back. The entire floor would smell like food, and he'd round us all, 3 of us, into his office to eat. He'd regularly fall asleep under his desk. The snoring was so loud you could hear it from the front. Once, a client asked what that noise was, and I said it was the plumbing. Woke up after his naps looking puffy but acting as if nothing had happened. He'd immediately go next door for a cherry Coke. Would constantly eat hard candy to stay awake during the day as well. Once he ate too many edibles at a party I hosted once and he passed out. He told me to hire someone, but when he saw the girl, he did a comical thing with his face. His eyebrows raised and eyes big. Think Ken Jeong. All because she was having trouble fitting into her chair. She was a plus-sized lady. He took away chairs the next day because apparently they encouraged us not to concentrate on the client. The girl was a no-call, no-show the following week. He had a love-hate relationship with a groundhog not long into his farming venture. He never caught that guy. Once threw a cricket at me from the very opposite end of the office. He and another coworker kept straight faces as I finally convinced myself the cricket flung itself at me. I watched the cameras at the end of the day only to see them do it, and I'm still traumatized. He has an office to this day full of the weirdest collection of things. A few feathers from favorite chickens of his that he had since consumed, all named and dated, a rabbit paw that someone gave him, a goat's hoof, a framed quote I told him, told by me to a very high homeless person. I don't remember the rest. It's just an odd place to go into. He had a hard time growing a beard and would ask me what I thought of the progress of his soup taster. All in all, nicest boss I've ever had. Well-meaning, if a little racially insensitive, all while being fascinated by other people's cultures. He'd buy different cuisines for us to try each week. Gave bonuses because he knew the job didn't pay that much, so that was always a nice surprise. He paid my former coworker when she had to stay home all through her husband's COVID. Also, he loves llamas, alpacas, baby goats, and when I showed him how to use Reddit, he'd almost always send me an alpaca photo. I still get a photo now and then. Also, 3 years after leaving, he still sends me photos of his illegal farm and recently asked me to post his cucumbers on Reddit. Also, I forgot to add that he fell into a poison ivy bush once and didn't know right away. He ran around screaming until we sat him in his office, semi-undressed, and put medicine on his wounds. He was miserable for days. It was hard to watch. He dove headfirst into the wall when asleep once and needed to go to the doctor and get 3 stitches on his busted lip. He came to work that morning with a huge lip and kept having to explain himself all day. We kept joking that his wife was smacking him around. He still insisted on snacking as usual. At one point, he sipped ketchup with a straw. Honestly, I don't know if we'll come this close to an actual Michael Scott again. The good-natured but woefully ignorant behavior is all there. Really not cool about the girl and the chair, but we remember how Michael treated women he didn't find attractive in the show. Not cool of you guys either for making light of his injuries, but I could honestly see that happening on the show as well. I had a boss once who spent all morning locked in his office. He asked me to come in after lunch where he showed me a handmade graph. He then proceeded to explain that this was his chart of all the whoopee he'd ever had in his life. See, here it's blank until I joined the army. Then I went to a working girl here. Then they sent me to Vietnam where hookers only charged $2 per time. That's where you see the big jump. I was on 2 tours, but then I got shot in the face. I came back home and you see how it just drops to almost nothing. Frankly, I was astounded. My boss is certainly reminiscent of Michael Scott. When I first started, I was essentially Pam as well, since I was both receptionist and his assistant to some extent. My favorite story was back when we were prepping for a conference. For some context, he's terrible with the English language in general, and will mangle phrases and descriptions to no end. How the turntables, etc. So on a group call, he kept talking about wanting a golden hamster ball to do giveaways with. He was raving about how great it would be, spinning around while people walked by, all the while everyone on the call was just sitting in confused silence. However, by that point, I'd become so good at decoding his nonsense that I knew he was referring to a gold raffle cage, and I sent him an image privately asking if that's what he was thinking. To this day, he still talks about the fact that I can read his mind and I must be psychic, and he refers to it as a hamster ball. All in all, he's a pretty nice guy and a solid boss. He hired me based on a gut feeling and has been decent to me ever since. I think I knew it would be a good fit when during the interview he tried to tell me about the 4 pillars of the company and forgot one. He told me later it was knowledge. He wanted a pomegranate for lunch and they were out of season, but that didn't stop him from sending me on a quest to every grocery store in town in search of a pomegranate. Multiple produce guys laughed at me, but that was the easiest $13 an hour I've ever made. No, I didn't find one, but when I came back he was eating Subway and he seemed to have forgotten he'd ever sent me. Maybe I could have gone home or to the movies or something, but I don't know. Driving around leisurely, listening to the radio seemed like a pretty good alternative to doing my actual work at the time. I did in fact check the gas station in Carbondale. They also don't carry pomegranates unless they're in season. I had a redhead boss who made us all sit down and watch a training video about how we shouldn't refer to him as a ginger because it's bullying. Nobody had ever called him that. I used Michael Scott as a reference point for an old boss of mine from the moment I started working there. He made Chewbacca noises on the regular because he thought one of my coworkers' names sort of vaguely sounded like Chewbacca. It didn't. He used voice-to-text extremely loudly in his office for no reason to send really personal messages, got really excited and wore a specific vest anytime we had after-work outings scheduled, shouted the same 7 references to old movies and extremely awkward hip-hop song quotes 100 times a day, and insisted on greeting all of our international coworkers very loudly in their language. They all spoke perfect English, of course, and he'd look around for approval after he'd done so. He'd also fully giggle at everyone's French accents on conference calls. He told me a lot about an improv show he did for a full year after it happened. That said, he had all the good parts too. He never hesitated to go to the mat for any of us, whether we deserved it or not. He gave really sage business advice and great examples of how to face challenges out of absolutely nowhere. And he came to every community play I did in the 4 years I worked for him, and told everyone else in the office how good I was in it for the following month and chastised them for not coming. When things got really serious or bad in my life, he couldn't have been more kind, helpful, and supportive. Honestly, probably the best boss I'll ever have. I've never worked for one myself, but my dad told me a story about his boss who was giving out awards to everyone in honor of how long they've worked there, and he'd give speeches for each person. A female employee received her award and he gave a speech about the story of how she came to work there, and he said, "At first I didn't want to hire her because she was so hot. My dad's not working there anymore, but I love that story because I'll never not picture Michael Scott giving Pam a Dundee and saying that about her. For all those asking, I'm Big Tuna's distant cousin, enlarged tuna fish." I had a boss that used to watch me through a gap in the glass partition between our desks. She wanted to see if I was paying attention during meetings. One day I put up a large folder to cover the gap and she freaked out. I still laugh when I think about it. This sounds more like Dwight, but still hilarious. Had a boss who was very particular. For instance, he'd open a random closet, look at the stuff inside, and then go on a tirade. "Look at all this. Who brought all this crap?" You did? Oh, well, somebody needs to throw it away." Constant stuff like this. Honestly, making your employees work extra to get rid of a problem that you yourself created may be something Michael Scott would do, but I think it's still possibly the most common boss thing that I've seen so far. I bet we've all had to do something like this at some point because of our manager's harebrained idea that lasted 2 seconds before they gave up on it or forgot about it. I once worked for a family company, not my family, where my boss often had loud fights in the halls with her husband, mother, and sister, the last of whom was apparently an addict with a penchant for stealing. I have a million wonderful stories about that workplace, but one that stuck out to me is the following. Once, for someone's birthday, she decided it would be fun to buy an anatomically correct male blow-up doll. She took this doll into the office, blew him up, and dressed him in a construction vest. The company was a contractor. When I walked by, my boss was trying to manipulate the position of the blow-up's member and asked me if I wanted to be the fluffer. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? My idiot boss insisted his daughters be flower girls in my wedding. I declined. At the reception, he told me I was spending too much time talking to one person, and I needed to work the room more. Was he referring to your new spouse by any chance? He held a meeting with our whole team, less one person, to discuss said person being gay. We'd all known for well over a year and never made a big deal out of it. So yeah, they're out there and that's why the show is so funny to me. I can relate. Did he try to kiss him? No, that guy was on vacation, so our staff meeting was strategically moved when he was out of the office. You mean he was on gaycation? I literally had a boss who'd stop us in the middle of our work and hold company-wide meetings talking about September 11th truther conspiracies and chemtrails. Mind you, we were a furniture-making company. He'd get so caught up in his conspiracy theories that he forgot to order wood to make furniture one month. I had one, and these are just a few of his greatest hits. He asked me how much I weighed during my interview. One time he was considering selling the company to a Japanese company, and while walking them around the building, he was heard saying, "We really bombed the hell out of you, huh?" He got on the intercom and interrupted everyone by yelling for someone to bring him the football team's schedule. I have a video of him telling a really cringy joke during a sales meeting. You could see at least one person covering their faces in embarrassment. One time he told me to call his assistant and have her bring him a bag of coffee and his 5-pound dumbbell. He had a secret facelift. He was mysteriously gone for 3 weeks and came back with a beard. I ended up with a box of pictures from the 70s with an exotic dancer giving him a personal dance. In the conference room. Same furniture. He had a huge closet where he'd hoard random stuff. He was a total pack rat and his wife didn't let him keep junk at home. I was looking for something one day and found a box labeled "Watches with Dead Batteries." Yep, he saved an entire box of watches that he knew didn't currently work and also he knew how to fix them, but instead he just kept them in a box. One time I watched his business partner go down the potluck line tasting everything with the same fork. At the end of the line, he stuck his used fork into the cake. I haven't eaten at a work buffet since. And honestly, these are just the ones I remember. It was 5 years of this. Oh, and this one seems relevant. One time he got new patio furniture and sent the guys from the shipping department to put it together at his house. Orders did not go out that day. My brother had 2 bosses at his first job that I think fit the bill here. It was an old married couple that owned the gym across the street from us. Probably in their 70s when he started working there. The wife was from Germany and super strict, and the husband was clearly losing it. Some notable mentions are the wife insisting the street be swept once a week, and this was my brother's task. Almost every single time, the husband would come out halfway through with a leaf blower and destroy any progress my brother had made. The husband would regularly sit in the sauna for way too long and have to be rescued by my brother and his co-workers. My brother opened every Saturday. They never gave him a key, so he'd have to hop the fence to get in. And finally, there was the time when the husband combined bleach and ammonia to clean the hot tub and sauna room, tear-gassing my brother in the process. That's not tear gas, that's chlorine gas. He could have killed your brother. Yep, I had one. He organized a thoroughly awkward award ceremony once that we never had to do again. He asked a Mexican employee if he knew his baby's name was going to be No Mas, during the shower we threw for him. Heard me once use the phrase economy of scale and then used it wrong 5 minutes later in a conversation with different people. And didn't know the meaning behind Black Friday and what it meant for a company to be in the black. Honestly, just like Michael Scott, only more of a jerk. Long ago, my 80-year-old boss pulled me into his office. "Well, Paul, I've noticed that your shirt's come untucked and that looks unprofessional." "Oh, sorry about that, Joel. I want you to start tucking your shirt into your underwear." Go ahead and try it now." "Joel, I have 15 women who report to me. I can't undo my pants in the office." "Sure you can." And he drops his pants. He's 80 and wearing Spider-Man underoos. This was also the story of how I went to work somewhere else instead. So, was that whole conversation just leading up to him wanting to make that one joke? Ish. If I wanted to see old men exhibiting their bare skin, I'd just go sit in my gym changing room until one of the starkers old blokes inevitably tried to start a conversation with me. I worked for a woman as her personal assistant and cat sitter. She was super rich and off the deep end crazy. She had me order a mannequin online and then paid me to take one of the mannequin's legs to Nordstrom to try and see what suitcase I could buy that would fit the dismembered mannequin body. Because she wanted to fly with the mannequin to Pittsburgh to display as her daughter, dressed in her daughter's clothes at that daughter's graduation celebration, and buying the mannequin was a whole thing too. She kept trying to get me to order from adult doll websites because she didn't quite get what they were.
This is less of a Michael Scott thing and more of a clinically insane thing. I want to hear more.
My boss used to carry around a backpack full of hammers, and if you fell asleep at your desk, he started banging a hammer on your desk until you woke up, and then he'd autograph the hammer and give it to you as a gift. I'd do it once for a free hammer. I worked with a genuine Michael Scott, a nice, well-meaning person who just did some absurd things. We had kidnapping drills one day where we learned how to not be kidnapped, and notably this was a regular boring office in a regular boring suburb. No reason why kidnapping would be on anybody's radar. He and several other guys randomly broke out into a push-up contest. Again, white-collar office, middle-aged dudes in khakis. Couldn't remember the nationality of our Hispanic colleague and tried to learn Spanish to make her feel special when she returned from maternity leave. The first thing he learned was that she was not Spanish and that she was in fact from Portugal. She knew like 5 words of Spanish. He once disappeared for 4 days, no call, no email, wouldn't respond to any of our attempts to reach him. Finally, someone drove out to his house to make sure he was alive. He had just forgotten to tell us that he was taking the week off, and then he lost his phone in a lake. There were many, many moments like these. Great boss, genuinely cared about everyone in the company. Occasional moments of brilliance where he really got things done. But oh my god, so many ridiculous moments. Mine had aspects of Michael Scott, notably the ones that are sad and pathetic and not funny at all. A couple of examples. He once called an all-staff meeting to announce his divorce. He then instructed our receptionist to lie to his soon-to-be ex-wife and deny he was in the office all the time. He was just so incompetent at his job. If a task was too big or complicated, he'd just, not do it. He wouldn't ask for help or anything, he'd just move on and leave whatever issue to fester. I'd have to constantly monitor and follow up with him to get things done that affected my job. His writing read like he used a thesaurus heavily. Tons of superfluous words clearly put in there to make him sound smart. And when he was terminated, he kept the corporate laptop and cell phone. After several strongly worded letters requesting their return, he drove back to the office, parked on the edge of the road, think busy rural highway, and made his teenage son carry it all across the yard and parking lot to deliver them. I'd been eventually tasked by the big bosses to coordinate his termination. They then gave me his job plus my previous one. I could do both within a 40-hour week, no problem. Oh boy, Dark Scott has entered the chat. Or left it, and I guess that makes you Dark Jim? Dark Tuna? I wonder what sort of company he tried to set up after his termination. We had an anonymous feedback program at work, and our boss was livid with the results, particularly with several comments that he frequently lost his temper in meetings and would yell at us. The more he talked about how incorrect and unfair and hurtful these things were, the redder and angrier he got until he finally pounded the table and shouted, "I do not scream in meetings, okay?" I had one for a year, and it was awesome. If he'd be in the middle of the story and the phone rang, he'd literally say, "Oh, just let it go to voicemail." If a customer called 5 minutes before closing, he'd demand I let it ring and go to voicemail again. He was late more often than I was. He frequently brought us coffees. He always took our side in customer disputes, and if a customer yelled at us or got mean on the phone, he'd call them back and get into an argument with them and tell them to order from someone else. He straight out told us if weather conditions were bad, he didn't care how late we were, just that we were safe. Sometimes he'd tell me on random days to take a 2-hour lunch. I was salaried and didn't punch in or out. He was great, and he gave me so much free stuff. We used to call him Michael Scott behind his back. Unfortunately, the owners were a little bit stricter than him. Myself and another coworker got fired, and said boss got demoted. It was fun while it lasted. And to clarify, my boss did take our department and customers very seriously and was on top of the numbers. He just knew that happy, well-taken care of employees are likely to produce more. We worked in a very stressful environment, so when we were able to take it easy a bit, he let us and often recommended it so that we'd stay sane. Upper management were just slave drivers and hated that we laughed so much because they thought that if you're having a good time at work, you're obviously not being productive. I was very productive because my boss took care of me and made it fun for me to come to work. Italians can lose it over broken pasta, but what makes Americans snap? Breaking Italians in front of spaghetti. Oh, okay, serious answers now. Hearing a request for lemonade and delivering something carbonated. I was visiting England once and asked for a soda. I'm from New York. And I meant a Coke, obviously. My British mom warned me to ask for Coca-Cola, and I, at 8, insisted I knew more and asked for a soda.
I got something like a club soda.
You know, America has a lot of different regional foods, but as an East Coast guy, a cheesesteak is a really simple dish, composed of shredded up steak with melted cheese on a hoagie roll. It's so simple I didn't think it could be messed up, and then I traveled some. Wow, I was frickin' wrong. I've seen a cheesesteak made in every wrong combination it could possibly be. But the worst was ordering a Philadelphia cheesesteak on a cruise ship and getting an actual steak with a slice of cheese melted onto it. I was completely flabbergasted.
That's not a cheesesteak, that's just sadness on a bun.
That guy on the mildly interesting Reddit who posted a picture of how the creamer sank to the bottom of his coffee, but he'd put the creamer in the coffee pot like some kind of wild animal. Raisins in the potato salad, at least to some. I'm convinced someone saw a Waldorf salad for the first time and confused the apples for potatoes. Low-fat cheese curds. I've been getting an insane number of responses to this, and thank you. I just wanted to point out that this is meant to be humorous. I'm a Chicagoan with a son in Wisconsin, and we're up there all the time. Low-fat cheese curds aren't a real thing as far as I know. It's just a joke, as per the topic. Thank you again. There was a guy on TikTok visiting from the UK, and they went to a Mexican restaurant and just poured the salsa over the chips in the basket. That made me really angry.
Ketchup on your prime rib? Straight to jail.
Seeing ketchup with any food that doesn't contain a bready junk food element on it actually makes the narrator feel physically ill. I know a lot of my fellow students at uni hated on pasta as a low-cost, low-effort sauce, and honestly, that makes me simultaneously furious and nauseous in equal measure. Ugh. Grabbing the tongs without clicking them.
Well, that's how you start them up. Another couple of clicks to turn them off later.
I watched a guy from New Jersey roll a New York-style pizza from tip to crust and just eat it like a burrito. I saw a New York guy watch that, and I saw his soul leave his body that day. New Jersey pizza culture is pretty much the same as New York. That guy was just a freak. Unless he was just trying to tee off the New Yorker, which we also like doing. Eating a hot dog in a bun from the inside instead of the end. I went on a date and the guy just started eating his hot dog this way. I asked why, and he said, "I don't want anyone to think I like sucking wieners." Like, what the frick? I paid for my meal and booked it out there. Ketchup on pizza. I saw this in Mexico and I was floored. In Thailand, you order a pizza from the most famous pizza delivery place and they give you no less than 20 packets of ketchup. My favorite is the American pizza in China, which is mayo, scrambled eggs, and potatoes. Oh! Warm soda, no ice. Calling a bacon, egg, and cheese an egg, bacon, and cheese. Eating a burger with a fork and knife, especially a fast food burger. I'll cut a thick restaurant burger in half before I tuck into it though. It gives you a point of attack to eat it that makes it easier. Whatever those s'mores were on the Great British Bake Off. Oh, and ketchup on a hot dog in Chicago. Apparently, it's common in the UK to drink instant coffee. The way they feel about heating up water for tea in a microwave is the way I feel about their instant coffee. My dad would fill up about a quarter of the cup with instant coffee and pour the microwaved water on it, and people wonder why I don't like coffee.
I'd say you take after your father. He didn't like coffee either, apparently.
Beer with ice. Like the seltzer on top of chips comment, this never even registered in my brain as something you could do. Huh. I'd say boiling a hamburger patty. Eating chicken wings, the quintessential American party food, but leaving a bunch of meat between the two bones of those flat pieces as you discard the bones. No, actually not eating chicken wings badly. Also, putting a cast iron pan into the dishwasher. Eating chicken wings incompetently will get you dirty looks. The second one will get you written out of Grandpa's will. Washing it with soap and water is acceptable, even if many think it's not due to outdated information on their part. But a dishwasher? That might be kinda wild. If you didn't get it out ASAP, it would probably rust. Putting the knife covered in peanut butter in the jar of jelly or jam. Honestly, 60% of the reason there aren't open-faced PB&Js is because you need to wipe the knife on the second piece of bread before dipping it into the jelly, you heathens. Eating a slice of greasy fast food pizza with a knife and fork.
When y'all put your breakfast rifle on the wrong side of the placemat. Any well-bred petty crook knows that the small concealable weapons go on the far left of the place setting. Plus, you've got to always keep your gat on the Bible and never a Bible on the gat. I don't care how religious you are. I was in Amsterdam for Liberation Day, and there was an American-style smoked barbecue stand.
I had to listen to someone try to complain their meat was uncooked because it had a pink ring. Sir, the pink ring is the point.
This is every frickin' summer with some of my friends. I've got a thermometer, I've got the official chart with safe temperatures from the health ministry. I had actual food safety training because I used to grill for a butcher that does party service. And yet they insist that everything that's not completely white is dangerous.
Cutting brisket the wrong way, and raisins in the potato salad. Haven't seen this one yet. My French roommate put ketchup on pasta and also on rice. A portion of my soul was lost watching him do so. Breaking spaghetti in front of Italian Americans. Hey, I'm eating here. Mate, judging by these comments, many Americans would be furious that I eat chips out of a bag with a spoon.
You do frickin' what now? Yo, with chopsticks you'd get a pass, but a frickin' spoon? What the hell, man?
I once watched in horror as my brother's trailer park girlfriend put ketchup on top of a $50 filet mignon. When she asked the waiter for ketchup, he looked concerned.
Look, I love my family, who are from the country, but they are these people. At our wedding, they asked our waiters for ketchup to eat with their steak. And you know what? The waiters did it without blinking an eye, and I love them for being themselves in every situation. Huh.
Taking a bite out of a Kit Kat bar instead of breaking them into pieces. Not rinsing the soap off the dishes and just letting them dry soapy. Eating a Snickers with a knife and fork. I know a lot of Swedes are banned from the food Reddit automatically. There was a debate whether Swedish cinnamon rolls had glaze or not. We Swedes said they most certainly don't have the glaze. We got told that it isn't up to us and we shouldn't gatekeep food. So then some Swedish mad lad took 2 pieces of crisp bread or crackers with ham and cheese and asked for feedback on his cheeseburger. This was not appreciated by the Americans. He argued that it had all of the elements of a cheeseburger and that they shouldn't gatekeep food. Now, if they see that you use a specific Swedish crap post forum, you'll get automatically banned from the food Reddit. That madman with the ham and cheese is the, well, technically, guy that we've all come to be perturbed by. Listen, I've lived in Sweden and they're a very fine people, and generally they can take a joke about their culture better than most. But they are really proud of the absolutely mid-tier food that is the standard in their country, and to boot, they get pretty defensive about the way it has to be eaten. So it's bold of them to go after other people's countries. Swedish pizza is absolute hell, by the way. Now I guess I'll sit in my flat and await assassination by surströmming. Squashing all of the juice out of the steak with the turner while it's on the grill. I'm going to add calling it a turner. What the hell is wrong with you? Mixing bourbon of decent quality with soda.
When my husband cheated on me, I spent 2 weeks drinking all of his pricey liquor with Diet Coke.
No ice in room temperature water at a restaurant. Well, there was that episode of the Great British Baking Show where they made s'mores, and apparently decided that s'mores are supposed to be fancy. Scratch-made digestive biscuits, whose similarity to graham crackers I don't know, chocolate ganache instead of just a chunk of chocolate bar, and Italian meringue that they were instructed to very carefully toast with a blowtorch because you don't want to get it all messy. S'mores are supposed to be messy, you pompous gits. Sausage and the mashed potatoes.
Oh, it's gonna be that type of party.
Italians cutting pizza with scissors.
I thought that was a Mexican thing. How do Mexicans cut their pizza? With Little Caesars.
The answer is Americans are allowed to snap about nothing. This is a lawless food wasteland where bacon and pickles can be in lemonade and on pizza.
Pickle lemonade at the fair was surprisingly tasty, but that might have been my body going, thank frick, liquid and electrolytes.
Biting into a string cheese instead of shredding it. Having your finger near the trigger before you're ready to fire. Putting ketchup on a giant pork tenderloin sandwich. Calling grilling barbecuing. Gay fun times in front of your salad. Poking holes in the brats and then burning them to death. Eating horse meat. Stabbing a sausage or pressing a burger down with a spatula.
Unless it's a smash burger, you've got to get those crispy edges.
Sweet grits. Even typing that, my lip curls. Savory grits, cheese grits, and plain grits exist, and there's no need to desecrate them with sugar and sugary substances. Men have stood before the Hague court for these crimes. Well, okay, not really, but they should have.
Well, that made my southern soul leap up in my throat. Revolting. Grits are made to be buttered and salted and peppered and used as insulation to keep eggs warm.
Ketchup and mustard belongs on hot dogs. It's the norm in the South, so fight me. Well, that's just why your side lost, man. Putting your finger on the trigger when you posed with your automatic freedom sprayer during your family Christmas photo shoot. Or, fries with mayo. Drinking straight vermouth. I saw a video on here of two British guys trying to eat barbecue ribs with a knife and fork. Luckily, the waiter corrected them. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? Turning a mac and cheese into a veggie bake. Ugh. Eating ribs, pizza, or a burger with a fork and knife. Spreading jelly on the bread before spreading the peanut butter. Blasphemous. My son does this and I don't even know who raised him anymore.
What? No. You do jelly first because it's easier to clean off the knife than peanut butter, and you don't end up cross-contaminating the jars. Wait, you put them both on the same slice?
Getting chicken fried steak and eating it with ketchup instead of gravy.
Asking for unsweetened tea in a southern state. I'm sorry, I don't want to join you in the diabetes life.
Eating a burger with a fork and knife. And yet some places are building their burgers so tall that it's physically impossible to eat unless you either do that or unhinge your jaw like a snake. Socks and man sandals. Cutting a sandwich in half, but not in a diagonal fashion. There's not one universal thing because the country's so big. On the one hand, you have Texans with their pride of Tex-Mex cuisine. Then California and Arizona, Sonoran, also have their own Mexican food styles, but it's not Tex-Mex and they will tell you as much. I've heard some even say that it's not real Mexican food if it isn't their regional style. Also, barbecue. Many Southerners really think it's American, as in the country, not continent, food. But it's actually the latter. They're big on their regional style. The cooking methods were from primarily the Taino peoples spread through the Caribbean. It was an affordable and efficient cooking style and spread through the slave trade. That's why Argentina and Brazil also have barbecue style, but Southerners are huge on barbecue and their regional styles, and often swear it's not real barbecue otherwise. Many think the South invented it, and if they do know the history, they swear they've perfected it. They're very territorial with their barbecue. Also, New Mexico has their own regional state cuisine that's hard to find outside their state, even in recipe books. How about enjoying your universal healthcare? Not tipping. I'm going to say eating a hot dog the hamburger way. It's not quite American, but the only thing that made me react that viscerally was watching a Brit pour his salsa over his tortilla chips instead of dipping them. I saw an episode of the British Bake Off or something adjacent where they had the contestants make hamburgers for some reason, and the judges began eating them with a knife and fork, and I had no idea how to react to that. I've seen a man eat a crunchy taco from Taco Bell with a knife and fork. It's been like 15 years and it still haunts me. He's a doctor, by the way. Putting ice cubes in red wine at a fancy dinner party. Many Americans do it casually on a hot day, but for traditional wine lovers, especially Europeans, it's borderline blasphemy. Meanwhile, Spaniards are mixing wine with Coke and Fanta. I've literally never seen a single American put ice in red wine. Chardonnay? Sure. Sauv Blanc? Absolutely. But red? Not once, anywhere, ever. And definitely not at a fancy dinner party. Mentioning the positives of socialism. You have to break the spaghetti in two. How else will you make it fit into the little saucepan? Drinking water instead of Diet Coke. Eating vegetables. Electing someone with morals and intelligence. Sorry folks, I'm a good way through the submitted answers now, and literally more than 3/4 of them are about well-done steak, ketchup, and eating American food with knives and forks. So I'm skipping through a lot, and I've got to fill the video somehow. What we're left with here is answers making fun of Americans and occasional humorous takes on things we've heard already. I swear to God, there were 7 back-to-back ones on well-done steak before this one Trump joke here, so enjoy, I guess. Suggesting we should use the metric system. As far as regional foods go, a Beirock Kraut Runza. Runza is about as regional as it gets, simply a mixture of seasoned ground beef, chopped cabbage inside a dough pillow, and baked. Adding onions is okay, but Italian sauce with ground meat or even adding cheese is crossing the line and makes it an abomination. Original recipe was brought over by Germans from Russia in the late 19th and very early 20th century, a local staple and classic farmhand food. Referring to football but meaning soccer. Basic human rights like universal healthcare and marriage equality. Drinking a Guinness before it settles. All these non-Americans who are obsessed with Americans. People abroad are like, Americans this, Americans that, why do they do this thing, why do they do that thing? We don't even ask about each other. I live on one of the coasts, and we don't ask about the middle of America, and they don't ask about us. I couldn't tell you what happens in North Dakota or anything about it. I'm not even sure I've ever asked or heard someone ask about what happens there, or the people, or what they struggle with, or why they like living there in 40 years of being an American. If I'm not asking or wondering about other states, I'm probably not asking about other countries in the royal we sense of what Americans think about them. I don't know about the rest of America, but if a Texan sees you putting any dang beans in the chili, there'll be hell to pay. Well, I agree with Texans on most things, but that's the only one I don't. When I make chili, it has no less than 4 kinds of beans. Doing a fascism on the deathbed of the greatest generation. Even the slightest, tiniest hint of suggesting common-sense weapon laws. So many American food crimes in Australia, but the atrocities they do to a hamburger is up there. A local takeaway does the lot, which includes the normal things like lettuce, tomatoes, cheese, and onions, but then it pops on a fried egg, some slices of beetroot, and a slice of pineapple. Does it slap? Yes, but it is just so wrong. Another common one is pizza. I once ordered a vegetarian pizza and it came with a frozen vegetable medley on top, including green beans. This was at a country pub, but still. I also had a satay chicken pizza that had corn on it. My Italian ancestors rolled in their graves when I bit into that crime against humanity. Putting ketchup on a hot dog, mostly Chicagoans, but to them apparently radioactive green relish is good. So mostly inapplicable. The majority of Americans look at you weird if you try to make an issue of this. Just stand in a Costco food court for a couple of minutes and watch the red stuff flow. Ketchup belongs on hot dogs, and Chicago is a freak. Well, you see, America's a pretty big place, so it changes from place to place. For instance, if you try to eat a rack of ribs with a fork and knife in Memphis, women will actually faint. Taking a prime cut of beef, like a ribeye or a porterhouse, and grilling it until it's a shoe and then dumping A1 or ketchup all over it. I'll never understand why people do this or even order steak in the first place. Just order a hamburger if you want ketchup. I can't believe I've scrolled through all these other answers and not seen pineapple on pizza. For the record, I enjoy Hawaiian pizza. My local joint does a pulled pork and pineapple pizza. It's actually pretty good. Gordon Ramsay trying to make a grilled cheese. I'm pretty sure that was just him trolling us, though. Our food is so regional here that we snap at each other all the time. Best example I can think of is Yankees when they try and cook gumbo or crawfish. If you hang out in the New Orleans or Louisiana Reddits for a little while, it won't be long before you see a "Is this gumbo?" post. And barbecue's the same way. Try putting a plate of Carolina barbecue in front of a Texan and tell me how it goes. Or the pizza in St. Louis. Or God forbid you put ketchup on a hot dog in Chicago. People from outside the US think grits are weird. Pfft, it's just polenta. Eat it, you cowards. People get so judgy about food. Be free. Eat your food the way you want. Don't let traditionalists hold you down. My Colombian wife squeezes ketchup all over her fries or potato chips in a plastic bag before eating it. Gets me every time. Halfway through, they're cold and soggy and her hands are covered in ketchup. Forgiving student loans. There were some videos floating around of 2 British guys making their way through Louisiana. It didn't tee anyone off or anything, but at one point one of the guys bit straight into a crawfish. Like, not peeling it, just straight through the shell. I felt bad for the guy mostly. Also, at one point they discovered hand grenades. I also felt bad for them the next day. Putting breadcrumbs or eggs in the mix for a burger. Calling everything on a bun a burger. A fried chicken sandwich is not a burger. If it's a ground meat chicken patty, sure. Watching British folks use a potato peeler on an avocado had me give up on the Great British Bake Off for 3 seasons. Calling American football rugby. Stirring the coffee with the sugar spoon and then putting the wet sugar spoon back in the sugar jar. The narrator refuses to believe that there's a single country in the world where this would be considered even remotely acceptable behavior. This isn't a world versus America issue, this is a crazy person versus everyone remotely sane issue. Get better friends. In my city, it's using ranch instead of blue cheese with wings. Biting a Kit Kat whole perpendicular to the lined sections. I saw a girl from the office try to eat a taco by holding the shell up to her mouth and shoveling the meat and cheese into her mouth like a broken Pez dispenser. I've seen videos of people eating bananas with utensils. I mean, what the frick, man? I've entered the point in my life where I try to avoid judging people for harmless things like food preferences. That being said, if you order steak well done, you're wrong and should feel ashamed. There isn't one. Nothing is sacred over here. Everything is disposable and for sale. Anything except Old Bay on blue crabs in Maryland. Pouring in root beer first and putting in ice cream second when making a root beer float. I saw my coworker from Mexico do this once, and I've never had to restrain myself so much before that moment. Surrendering your lawn to heather, clover, and wildflowers rather than keeping it as tight as a marine's haircut. Big talk and bigger fails. The most satisfying beatdowns you witnessed. I watched some college bro D-bags continually make fun of a rugby team out on a fancy dress and costume bar crawl. The rugby players were all dressed as superheroes, wearing spandex outfits. The head D-nozzle kept chirping at a massive dude wearing a Robin costume. The rugby guys ignored the D-bags for a while until head moron intentionally walked up and knocked Robin's pint out of his hand. Robin proceeded to beat the stupid out of 3 guys, including head moron, all the while wearing green spandex. It was poetic to watch. Of all the many athletes I would not F with, rugby is at the top of my list, maybe even above actual fighters. A couple of buddies and I finished work at 1 a.m. We went to grab a bite at the Waffle House. The guy manning the grill that night was a Polynesian gentleman named Isaac, who was about 5'4" in terms of both height and width. The dude was built like a fire hydrant. A drunk couple came in acting all sloppy, talking crap and making a scene, and got booted right as Isaac went to have a smoke break. The guy got in Isaac's face, spit on him, and the entire restaurant got to watch as Isaac slowly and methodically took off his apron and folded it up, took off his work shirt and folded it up, and then turned back around and absolutely crumpled the guy. Like, I'm pretty sure that his kids are going to be born with TBIs from the genetic memory of being punched in the face so hard. Isaac, not even breathing all that hard, turned back around, unfolded his shirt and put it back on, unfolds his apron and puts that back on too, and is finishing his cigarette as the cops roll in to haul the guy away. That guy's girlfriend got real cooperative in a real hurry. Rule number 1 for fighting: protect yourself at all times. Rule number 2 for fighting: don't fight Pacific Islanders. When I was a kid, there was this huge, terrifying German shepherd named Max who lived next door. He was constantly getting out of his yard and chasing everything. He was mean, and all of us kids just knew that as soon as the cry, "Max is out!" went up, our only hope was to run home as fast as we could. One day, Max got out, and I saw him chasing a neighborhood cat. Max was hot on his tail and managed to knock it off his feet. It landed on its back, and Max went for its belly. The next thing Max knew, he was wearing that cat like a helmet. It had its front legs wrapped around his head with its claws digging in. Max's ear was in the cat's mouth being ripped to shreds, while the cat furiously kicked Max's muzzle into a hamburger. He couldn't shake the cat either. Finally, the feline let go, landed on its feet, and took off running. Max ran home yelping in pain, and he didn't chase anyone after that. I don't remember him even trying to get out of his yard anymore. He really effed around and found out. I love all animals and I don't condone the harming of any of them. A lot of this doggo's behaviors likely stemmed from a bad owner. That said, this is a great and very literal example of your bark being worse than your bite, and a fitting example of some of the idiots we're going to hear about today. I was serving drinks at a club on a punk music night. The band that night was particularly wild, and the normal working-class group of regulars was being hassled by a group of skinheads that were only there to fight. A large Native American guy was sick of the crap the skins were throwing down and asked them to knock it off. One of them, wearing a bowler hat and dressed in white like the guys in Clockwork Orange, got in his face and started trying to make the native kid flinch. After a bit of taunting, the skinhead, with the encouragement of his friends, smacked the kid hard across the face. At that point, the native kid stood up from the bar stool and revealed that he was a good 1.5 feet taller than the skin, put a monster hand around his throat and walked the skin out the side emergency exit, while the guy kicked and tried to fight back. I heard some panicked screaming coming from the open door, but it started and stopped almost immediately. The native kid came back inside about 30 seconds later, wearing the skinhead's bowler hat. Oh my god, he ate him Kirby style. Waiting in line to pay cover at a bar, and the exit doors were right beside us. Big double steel doors with solid metal jam divider in between them. A guy was being escorted out by 2 bouncers. He was screaming that once they got him outside, they'd better run because he was going to kick both their butts at once. Then he slammed a hand into each door to throw them open, smashing face first into the metal divider between them, knocking himself out cold. One of the greatest things I've ever seen. I was waiting tables at a bar and I heard some commotion over the band. I turned in time to see some guy rip himself away from security, who were about to drag him out, and take off running at full speed for what he thought was the exit door. There was an in door which swung open into the bar and an out door that did not. He hit so hard that he knocked himself out cold. The bouncer just dragged him outside and left him on the pavement. It was like a cartoon. I still laugh when I remember. First time I saw it, it was in middle school. My friend was a small, quiet, and gentle girl who loved anime and spent time with me drawing. Well, one day the class bully, who was easily twice her size and probably 3 times her weight, started messing with her, pushed her art supplies off her desk, poked her, and then he stole her artwork. She got up and bull-rushed that kid, slammed him up against the wall and pinned him there. To this day, I didn't know that such a tiny person could wrangle someone so much stronger than her. Afterwards, he broke down in tears and whined to the teacher that she was hitting him, tried to claim a whole bunch of things. She'd never hit him, she just pinned him. She didn't get in trouble, but word spread quickly that he was the school's biggest coward. He never messed with her again. 25-year-old chef at my work was clowning on our 37-year-old coworker for having a 25-year-old girlfriend. And the quiet guy immediately piped up that literally 6 months ago, the chef had been pursuing one of the waitresses the second she turned 18, so maybe he might want to shut his damn mouth about inappropriate age gaps. I worked at a prison. A young punk tried to pick a fight with a mentally challenged person who worked out to ease his frustrations. The mentally challenged one fed him a steady diet of lefts and rights until he got tired of punching. Then he grabbed the instigator by the belt and the collar and threw him into a sink. The sink broke off the wall and he started beating the instigator with the sink. All said, he had a broken cheekbone, broken nose, broken orbital, a few teeth knocked out, and needed stitches in a handful of places. The instigator maybe got 2 good punches in before he got worked. This was at a NASCAR event many years ago. Some guys in their early 20s walked to our neighbor's RV and grabbed a bottle of booze from their table. The neighbors were walking around the infield, partying elsewhere. I was a kid at the time, and I told the folks I was with, and the adults, who were a bunch of middle-aged, overweight, functioning alcoholics, who walked up and grabbed the bottle from the younger guys. A few words were shouted, and parties went their separate ways. Well, one of the older guys was a little slower and had a bum knee, and a couple of the younger guys decided to turn back around and circle around him. There were some threats and name-calling and stuff, and the lead butthole said something along the lines of, "You don't have your buddies now. You want to repeat what you said now that you're alone and surrounded?" And the older guy said something like, "Your buddies might take me down, but you'll be asleep before they do." The butthole lunged, caught a hook, and down he went. By then, most of the group I was with came running back, realizing they were missing one. The only person that got hurt was the mouthy kid. Now, I was maybe 12, and this was almost 30 years ago now, so my memory's a bit fuzzy, but I specifically recall the words, "but you'll be asleep," and couldn't get over how frickin' cool that was to say before knocking some guy out. My older brother was drunk and picked a fight with what turned out to be one of British Columbia's top 10 kickboxers. Even drunk, the guy knew not to go for the easy knockout. He effed my brother up with body blows before he got bored and laid him out. It's one of my favorite memories. Not a fan of your brother, I see. Seen firsthand? Well, there's a couple of fights that come to mind. One was outside of an underground club, and this drunk guy was really getting into it with a rando in the parking lot. A rando who was considerably bigger and more sober than Drunky. Drunky is fuming mad, spouting all manner of profanity at this guy's entire family tree, and of course he challenges the guy to a fight. At which point Rando pulls out lightweight training gloves from his bag and says, "Trust me, you're going to want to do this on grass." Drunky's friends tried to drag him away, like, "That guy is going to kill you. Who just carries gloves around?" But, oh no, Drunky was ready to fight with the fury of 1,000 suns. Shortest fight you've ever seen. Rando knocked him cleanly out in one punch and caught his head on the way down. Downright compassionate, in my opinion. I've never seen anything quite like it. I've always been the fat kid, and in high school, one of the other fat kids managed to lose a lot of weight over the summer break and came back a cocky little prick. He took great pleasure in running off with kids' hats, and one day he decided to run past and take mine. Obviously, thinking himself much quicker than the fat kid, he only ran about 2 school buildings away before bothering to turn around. Surprisingly, I was on his tail the whole way. These legs are strong from carrying around extra weight, and he made the mistake of stopping about 2 feet from a brick wall. So he had zero time to react to being body slammed up against a brick wall by 200 pounds of enraged nerd. Picked my hat up and left him winded on the ground, and he stopped stealing hats. I kind of have to believe he was flattened against the wall like a cartoon character, and that once you left, he peeled off it like a sticker, and then his two-dimensional self sort of jiggled its way back to school until someone else inflated him back to normal. I was at a bar in Key West one time, and this guy was talking mad crap to another guy. I don't know what it was about, but he just wouldn't shut his mouth. He said, "I'm gonna F you up, bro." Probably a dozen times. Anyway, the other guy eventually had had enough and slammed his head into the bar, almost knocking him out. The bartender looked over and asked what happened, and he said, "I don't know, I think he tripped." He then threw some cash on the bar and walked off as the guy was quietly trying to stand back up. At a bar in college on Halloween weekend, probably 2006 or 7, I saw a guy dressed up as a Spartan from the movie 300 talk crap to a bouncer. The bouncer picked him up and used his face to open the door and throw him into the alley. There was a kid who lived in the room next to me in college who was real tall and quiet and a bit of a gym rat. One night we just happened to be walking down the same road with separate groups, and for whatever reason some frat guys started yelling at us to move along. No idea why. Just guys being jerks, I guess. My friends and I just ignored them and kept walking. They told this guy to beat it or they'd kick his butt, and he lost it. He ripped off his shirt and screamed, "You don't own the frickin' street, come and make me, motherfrickers." They didn't make him or anyone else do anything that night. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? After a fairly serious accident in a rail yard while we were cleaning up a major derailment, one of the younger guys was still shaken up pretty bad and not ready to go back to work. He had nearly been killed, along with several others, and watched his operator get badly hurt. You don't need or want a guy whose head isn't in the game on a train wreck. It's a dangerous enough job without being distracted, and when he told his foreman that he couldn't deal, the foreman should have respected that and sent him off-site. However, Scott the foreman had serious little man syndrome and was one of the cockiest little Fs I've ever met. His response to a traumatized young man saying he couldn't deal with that night was to call him a little B-word, to man up and to get back to work. That started an argument that devolved into the nastiest fistfight I've ever seen. Scott got teed off and threw a punch, and the kid tore into him like a man possessed. He had been getting crap from Scott since he started, and apparently he'd just had enough. He punched, kicked, elbowed, and beat him down, and then started smashing his face in with a hard hat. Scott was such a bloody mess after they pulled the kid off him, his own wife wouldn't have recognized him.
I hope Scott was okay.
If by okay you mean not dead, then yeah, the kid didn't kill him. If by okay you mean not permanently damaged, the answer is most definitely a no. He got effed up like nobody's business. He was a crap-tier foreman at the best of times and got exactly what he deserved. He deliberately made the situation worse, and he threw the first punch. Having to look at his own effed-up face in the mirror every morning for the rest of his life should serve to remind him of how to treat other people. I believe they call that effing around and finding out. Supervisor kept claiming credit for one of his employees' ideas. One day, management wanted the supervisor to explain one of these ideas, which would save the company a silly amount of money and he claimed was his own. He asked for the employee to help him describe the formula and how to implement it, and the employee said, "No, I'd like to see you describe this." It was brilliant. Supervisor was let go that day. Sadly, the employee with all the ideas was never truly compensated. This one isn't a fight, but it is relevant, I think. One of my younger brothers was begging my mum for an air rifle. Mum was always against it because she didn't want him just walking around killing birds and squirrels for no reason. Brother made the mistake of swearing he was going to eat anything he killed. Mum called his bluff by getting an air rifle and made him go get a squirrel or bird. He hit a bird but didn't kill it, just wounded it. Immediately, my brother started panicking. I've never seen anyone turn so white in my life. He broke down and started crying as the bird was flapping around on the ground, squawking in pain. My mum had to get the bird and break its neck, and then made my brother bury it in the backyard with a grave marker. In high school, a bunch of us were hanging out in the parking lot wondering if we should bother entering an all-ages party. A car with 2 guys and 2 girls pulled up and honked the horn. One of the guys, who happened to know our group, was standing in the way and the guy honked again. Realizing his mistake, he moved and said he was sorry. The driver said, "Get the F out of the way next time," clearly trying to impress his dates. The guy chuckled and said, "I'm not afraid of you." The driver screeched to a halt, put the car in park, leapt out of said car, got into some karate stance and started throwing kicks, one of which was caught and he was thrown to the ground where he proceeded to get a much-deserved butt-whooping. "I can take him," said I, seconds before getting absolutely mopped by a medium to large Samoan fella. Medium-large Samoan fella is code for frickin' enormous. The mouthiest bully in high school liked to bully everyone. His name is Brent because screw him. By the time he was a junior, he started picking on a freshman who is a multi-level black belt. The freshman is calm, but has had enough. The two decide on a place, day, and time, and before that, Brent has to say how practicing martial arts isn't the same as fighting. I wish I'd seen it, but much of the school did because they wanted to watch Brent lose, because screw Brent. Very quickly, Brent was in a chokehold and losing consciousness in front of everybody as he gently lets him down on the pavement. And no, Brent never stopped being a twit. He just changed his style from punk to gangster. He was the whitest pizza-faced kid ever. I wish I saw the fight because I would have tied his shoes together afterwards. Not the wildest, but one that directly involved me. This one guy in high school, he was known for having anger problems. I was trying to open a door to the classroom, but I had to shuffle my books to my other arm in order to properly pull the handle because it was on the opposite side. This guy decided I was taking too long and starts to huff and yell at me. I turn around and he's raising his fist to throw a punch while I'm cornered in the doorway. Note, I'm a pretty average-sized teenage girl. It's not exactly a fair fight. Split second, my first response was to smack him with an open hand just enough to surprise him and get through the door without being punched. I did not get punched, however he had quite a mark on his cheek. Not only that, but he then complained to admin about it, so he had to admit to multiple people that he tried to punch a girl and instead got slapped in the face. And somehow I was the bad guy in his story. Play stupid games, win embarrassing prizes, man. Yep, cry bullies are gonna cry bully. I won't discount that there's a possibility he wasn't actually going to hit you, but he sounds like an aggressive, posing jerk anyway, so he can take his non-permanent damage as a sign to be less aggressive in public. There was this girl in high school that boxed since early childhood. Her dad was a short-lived pro boxer turned trainer, and her uncle was a Golden Gloves boxer while in the Navy. This one kid who was raised to believe women were all dainty and fragile put down like $200 that he'd knock her down. He further insulted her by saying he'd only slap while she could use full punches. This was dumb high school kids, so it was behind the school and it was bare knuckle since there weren't any gloves available. It took 5 seconds. He took a jab and a hook in quick succession and precision to the chin and was out. High school. A girl and I were about to fight, face to face screaming. She turned and threw her books at the wall and then kind of windmilled her purse and flung it at the wall. It broke open and I burst into laughter. It just caught me by surprise and felt ridiculous. Got my butt kicked pretty soundly. I learned never ever to laugh in a fight. Making up names here, but one of my best friends, Rob, got his butt handed to him by my other good friend, Riley. We were playing some pickup football, and for no reason, Rob just starts taunting and talking a lot of smack to Riley. And it was personal. To this day, I have no idea why he was acting like this, because while they weren't best friends, they were normally chill with each other. Long story short, Riley and Rob squared up. Riley punched Rob in the gut, grabbed Rob's head, and kneed him in the face, shattering his nose. It was over in 5 seconds. Rob is one of my best friends. He's like a brother to me. But he absolutely deserved to get his butt kicked. He was acting way out of line. I managed a brewery for a while. There was one time a guy came in without shoes. I told him he had to wear shoes in the brewery because people break glasses all the time and it's a safety issue. He decided that was the most offensive thing he'd ever heard. He got in my face and started yelling, telling me he'd F me up and stuff. So I let him know he's no longer welcome and that if he stays, I'll call the cops. He keeps screaming in my face, slurs, threats, you name it. So I call the cops, with my cell phone right in front of him. I even put it on speakerphone so he knows I'm not bluffing. He keeps on screaming, keeps threatening, and so on and so forth. 911 dispatch hears him and actually puts some hustle onto the cops. It helps that the brewery was downtown, so there's already some police presence. Within 2 minutes, the cops arrive and he starts yelling at them and threatening them. They weren't in the mood, or rather, given that this is America, they were in exactly the mood you'd expect. And they had him forcefully on the ground in moments when he got in their face. Turns out the guy actually had warrants out. Faffo to the extreme when all he had to do was just walk away. It's not like we were just going to serve him the moment he threatened me. 20 years ago, we lived in a really bad part of the city. I'd just gotten divorced. I was working all the time. My 13-year-old son was living with his dad for school purposes, just finishing the year. My sister was just a few houses away from them, and I was about 5 minutes down the highway from everyone. My son was and is a sweetheart, but he was also a big kid. He was about 5'11" and probably 250 pounds. He was also a skater and metalhead. It's unusual enough to see a heavy skater, much less one with hair down his back, and a shoelace for a belt, but I'm rambling. He was an easy target, is my point. Over a period of a few weeks, he was getting bullied by a kid his age that went to his school and lived in the neighborhood. It was mostly just talking smack at first, but the harder my son tried to not engage, the worse it got. He'd just be out trying to skate and this kid would follow him, talk mad smack, say awful things to him, throw pebbles at him, and say inappropriate stuff about me. Just anything to get a reaction. I can't imagine what was going on at that kid's house that he'd go out and pick on the biggest kid in the neighborhood, but he did. Also, my ex-husband is the kind of man who'd get mad at you for getting beat up, so my son didn't tell him. He said he didn't tell me because he knew I was already stressed out and didn't want to worry me more. It eventually came to blows, and my son, quote, won by knocking this kid on his butt and screaming at him to leave him alone. He thought it was over. Nope, the kid came back with his older brother. The brother punched my son in the face and then smashed his skateboard. He destroyed my son's main source of happiness. I think the first kid knew he'd effed up because the next afternoon when they got off the bus, the kid got off first and hauled it ahead so my son wouldn't catch him. But my son did catch him. He chased him down, shouted his name, and when the kid turned, my son apparently flew through the air like he was in a kung fu movie, hitting this kid square in the gut with both feet. Folded this kid in half and knocked the wind out of him. Thankfully, the kid just squirmed on the ground for a few minutes until he caught his breath, then got up crying and ran away. He never messed with my son again. Sounds like bullcrap, right? I wasn't even there. It was my sister who called me at work and told me about it. She saw the entire thing out of her kitchen window and said it was ugly, but also the most amazing thing she'd ever seen. Said it even took her a minute to get mad because she was just like, wow. Years later, we talked about it and my son said it was just pure rage. He was so fed up with everything and losing his skateboard just sent him over the edge. He said he didn't even think about the flying kick. It just happened. He was just as surprised as everyone else. Reality TV show idea. From private jets to paycheck. Can a billionaire survive on their worker's salary for a month? I doubt a month is enough to really feel the effect. That and a camera team just changes everything. I won't trust doing business with a random nobody, but a guy in a suit with a whole production team following him? That's just a different story. That's why reality shows are intrinsically just that. Shows. I think it would be better if they had to live with their lowest salaried employee for a month or two, in my opinion. In their house, dinner with the family, travel to and from work together, same lunch, kids with homework, the works. Building that relation would, in my opinion, do much more for this problem than just experiencing below your normal standard of living before returning to it. You're much more likely to feel empathy for a family you know, and much less likely to forget them. Anything else would just be another show about wealthy people having a fun adventure to talk about at cocktail parties. This would just end up incredibly self-serving and boring. They'd never truly experience what it's like to be in the precarious position of a minimum wage employee living hand to mouth, and the novelty is just salt in the wound. It would be more interesting to see the reverse. Isn't this almost exactly the same premise as Secret Millionaire? Do you guys even have that in the US? I guess it's a slightly different premise though, as the question here is for the salary to be what the person pays their employees, to encourage some awareness of their livelihood, I guess, rather than the minimum wage of the country. Sure, I'd watch it. They'd never do it though, because then they'd have to admit that they don't pay a living wage. Disagree actually. All they have to do is stick it out for a month and then they can say from personal experience that it isn't that bad. Of course, they never have to deal with the effects of living that way in the long term. It's kind of like when privileged college students pretend to be homeless by camping out on the quad for a night. Oh, they wouldn't have any trouble. Most of them are self-made, and most have a large number of financial skills that 99% of people don't. They'd micro their finances and come out better off than most people. You think someone like Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, or Elon Musk couldn't handle it? What about Warren Buffett? The guy is already living a modest life. A lot of idiots in the comments seem to fail to realize that a lot of these billionaires were already in a super crappy position before, and they pulled themselves out of it. These people run massive corporations and charities, and you idiots seriously think that living your life for a few months would be a challenge to them? That's some cringe. I think you're a little bit blue-pilled on some of these people's self-made man narratives there, man. While there's certainly a level of hardship that some pioneers of industry had to endure, all of the success stories you've mentioned here were solidly middle class at the poorest. And most of them started their ventures in the 80s or 90s at latest, when rent and property values were just more affordable for a startup. Their modern-day counterparts have a much higher barrier to entry. And to go back to them being middle class at worst, being a young recent graduate with an idea, time, and a dream ahead of you, and at least like a bed in your family home to fall back on, is a far cry from being modern poor, from a family who might even rely on your income, and unable to sink months or even years into kind of making your business run. I think it's certainly possible to have a rags to riches story from any background, at least in a first world country, but I think it's harder than it used to be. There was actually a similarly themed show in Hong Kong and mainland China years ago. They swapped billionaires with bottom feeders and let the rich do the basic jobs on the lowest salary to see how far the rich could go purely by their own effort. Nearly all of the billionaires admitted that they couldn't make it anywhere regardless of how hard they worked. Even working without sleeping and resting couldn't give you any accumulation to help you climb up to the higher level of society. There was only despair and admission that the divide between poor and rich was already a deep valley, and mere personal effort made little sense. It stirred a big debate among the society back then, and I think that was part of the reason the show got cancelled. There was also another show in China, swapping senior political figures with community-level council workers to see how good they could do in each other's posts. The mayors were flooded by the angry mobs who kept asking for more and more benefits that were impossible to fulfill, and by the end they had to admit that the amount of work at basic community level was just too much to achieve anywhere. The show also got cancelled quite soon after a few episodes. There was a UK show where celebs lived with benefit claimants for a week, only a few episodes. One was Boris Johnson's sister, the journalist. I remember she criticised the woman for smoking bootleg cigarettes on £70 a week. What a waste of money, yada yada. And at the end she said there was no wonder she smoked, life was so hard and miserable, and she'd smoke as well in that situation. People kept petitioning for the likes of Ian Duncan Smith to live on £70 and see how far he gets. Still think that's a pretty good idea for all MPs who affect policy. I'll be a contrarian here and say that I bet they'd be able to thrive. Usually the CEO of a company got to that position because they're an uber-talented human, obvious exceptions excluded. I think a CEO would be able to manage their resources effectively and make it work. I know this is hard to fathom for the internet's stupid hate train for the rich, but most of them were smarter and worked harder than you when they were younger, which is why they're in a place that they're in now, and you're not. So I imagine they'll manage just fine. There are a lot of careers that require some insane levels of hard work and intelligence that don't pay six figures. Some do and some don't. I just think that's worth mentioning. If they did it for 3 months minimum, I'd watch it, with problem scenarios thrown in. Broken down car, tube strike, dodgy boiler, sick child. I think the wheels would come off pretty quickly. Don't forget the pay rent or buy food dilemma scenario.
Solved that one years ago. Just buy ramen noodles and eat 2 packs of that every day until you're caught up back on rent. Easy peasy.
Don't forget to at least chuck in a handful of frozen or tinned vegetables, an egg, and a bit of soy sauce to convince yourself that it's a proper meal.
And triple the cost? Ha, no, it's about efficiency.
At least add the egg. Eggs are cheap as frick. You can get like a dozen for $1.25, which comes out to about 10 cents each. This was written in 2019 and has aged wonderfully. I love reality shows, so I'd watch it depending on who produced it. If it's too fake with too many emotional moments, advertising and people shouting, I'm out.
I freaking hate that emotional moment bullcrap. Kitchen Nightmares and Bar Rescue used to be great, now I can't even watch them. Same with Undercover Boss.
Oh, it's more than just the money. It's the lack of security these people endure. Not knowing if you'll lose your job tomorrow and have no savings. Being kicked out of your home. An unexpected bill you can't afford which may lead to increasing debt. Putting these rich people in a poor lifestyle for a month isn't enough. Even if they lost their money and homes, they'll have such a huge network that they'll be back on their feet in the time it takes for us peons to earn enough to eat for a week. They could never really understand what it's like to be poor or ever face that reality again. So, what would happen? It'd be a completely self-serving advert about how, now I realize that we need to do more for our employees. The workers get a small vanity bonus, probably give an immigrant worker with limited English a car. They'll pat themselves on the back. And then 2 weeks later, they've forgotten about the show and they'll go back to their old ways. If you haven't seen it, I'd recommend The Act of Killing. It's a documentary following an elderly man who was once a member of a government-sanctioned anti-communist death squad in Indonesia. Now the commies are defeated, he's celebrated in his own country. There's a scene where they had him do a mock-up of a torture and execution method he'd used. He asked production to hold because he found it traumatic. In a very raw moment, he asks the question, "Is this what my victims were feeling in their last moments?" The producer responds, "No, what your victims was feeling was much worse because you were able to ask us to stop, and they knew there was no escape." You can see in a couple of seconds it changes the guy's whole worldview. And the depressing part is that he's the only one to have any sort of realization like that. The other guys had no such realization, or maybe they had one years ago and didn't care. I would imagine a billionaire who's been rich for most or all of their adult life equally would have trouble conceiving of the dread of inescapable poverty. I'd do more than a month and without any contact to rich buddies either. If it's a month, I think a lot would just buy rice and beans every day and go, "See? It's super easy to be poor. You just need to make better economical choices. I've proven myself right." Longer than that, and they'll have to really get used to how their lowest paid employees live. Would they learn a lesson? Maybe? Likely not. They'd still have a mansion to come back to at the end of it. They'll give their lowest paid people a one-time bonus, or maybe they'll drag one out in front of the cameras to give them a fancy car so their own reputation gets better. And then they won't change anything else. Rice and beans, huh? Wish I'd thought about that sort of meal when I was a poor student. I'd just likely have the mercury poison of eating tinned tuna every day for 2 years. But yeah, I think a lot of these TV situations are a bit too controlled, and the people who run TV networks would have no reason to want to run a show that would put ideas like wealth inequality in people's heads. Frankly, I'm amazed that Chinese one we heard about earlier existed. A lot of rich people voluntarily go on vacation to third world countries. The catch is they know they'll have a way out and an end date. I'd be interested to watch a show where their CEO had to be personally financially responsible for the welfare of 50% of their lowest paid employees for 10 years, and their net growth percentage equaled their bonus every year, with a big bonus if both the company and the employees were profitable at the end. The weird thing is, they would be profitable. You should look up the story of Harris Rosen. He's a guy who started up growing up poor on the Lower East Side of Manhattan and became wealthy in the Florida hotel business. He decided to shepherd part of his fortune into a troubled community with the melodious-sounding name of Tangelo Park. A quick snap from the city's tourist engine, this neighborhood of small, once charming houses seemed a world away from the theme park pleasures as its leaders tried to beat back substances, crime, and too many shuttered homes. Nearly half of its students had dropped out of school. 21 years later, with an infusion of 11 million of Mr. Rosen's money so far, and Tangelo Park is a striking success story. Nearly all of its seniors graduate from high school, and most go on to college on full scholarships that Mr. Rosen has financed. Young children head for kindergarten primed for learning, or already reading, because of the free daycare centers and pre-kindergarten program that Mr. Rosen provides. Property values have climbed, houses and lawns, with a few exceptions, are welcoming. Crime has plummeted. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? I think it's a very common mistake of well-meaning, generous people to assume that people who do bad things must not realize what they're doing, because it's hard to imagine someone being a deliberately crappy person when the idea of that repulses you. The idea of, if the super rich only understood what it's like to be poor, they'd give people more than slave wages. It's not that they don't know, it's that they don't care. There's nothing for them to learn from this. A month isn't long enough because no rent is due and stuff. A year would be more fitting. You should watch Undercover Billionaire on Discovery, not to be confused with Undercover Boss. Billionaire Glenn Stearns moves to Erie, Pennsylvania with just $100, a truck, and no contacts, and has to make a company valued at $1 million in 90 days. He also can't mention who he is to anyone. It's pretty much exactly like you're describing, and it's insanely entertaining. Okay, Googling "is undercover billionaire legit" brings up old Reddit threads about it where people said Twitter kind of exposed it, because everyone in the city knew something was going on. So every time Glenn went on to get a loan, a job, or even people who literally worked for free and donated time to help for free, they only supposedly did it because they'd seen cameras or they knew it had to be connected to the stir in town. I did enjoy the show regardless, and what was leaked about it didn't really discredit it entirely. But yeah, the tires he picked up and sold at the beginning of the show were supposedly planted there, and a few other things. But not everything was debunked or discredited, so it still had some good lessons. No, slumming is not living your entire life in a slum. Here's what would happen. Fake billionaires like Trump will come to this show, and real billionaires probably won't. Those who appear on the show will brag about how they're self-made and their employees could make do with even less. And we'll find out, like that TV show Naked and Afraid, that outside of the camera, these billionaires were living in their luxury RVs, sipping martinis, and having affairs. There was that episode of American Dad where they tried to live on minimum wage for a month. It was fantastic. Stan ended up an addict in like 3 days. They're just treated as a novelty since they know they'll be getting their billions back at the end of the month. They wouldn't have to truly live like a person who lives hand to mouth every day of their lives. They wouldn't really learn anything from it. In fact, they'd probably look back on it and laugh. Remember when we had to eat that can of ravioli?
They'd treat it like going on safari, I think.
I think they'd have to agree to swap everything down to the last detail. Apartment, car, if they even have one, wardrobe, food, and hobbies. And it would have to be ongoing, not just a couple of months. The real question is how to get a CEO to agree to it. They'd also have to be allowed to make different decisions on the starting conditions. You're not proving anything by dropping a CEO in the position of a minimum wage worker who's underwater on their car payments and behind on rent and watching them struggle. If the CEO would have chosen a different car and a smaller apartment, for example. Only if they also put a low-level employee in the CEO's position to highlight that it's not all golf games and getting other people to do your work. Depends if he's self-made or not. Self-made rich people often know very well what it means to be poor, and that's why they worked so hard not to be. Some extremely wealthy people live very humbly, and many started from the bottom as a lowest-level employee themselves, barely scraping by. No, I hate all reality TV that doesn't feature Gordon Ramsay. I support raising the minimum wage, and the concept definitely resonates with me, but the show concept is not going to be life-changing for anyone involved. I'll brace for people hating me for saying this, but I don't understand why we fault people for making a lot of money, as long as they do it honestly. The dark secret of any executive, athlete, artist, or actor who makes an exceptional amount of money is that this is what the market will pay them. The CEO of company X or Z likely has a skill set that's very useful for planning corporate strategy that few people have and that takes decades to develop, like understanding finance, the ability to read market trends, skill negotiating partnerships and labor agreements. If they're good at this, the company and its shareholders, if they're publicly traded, will also benefit. So this is in many ways an investment. As for the workers who earn less, we should raise the minimum wage, but they too are free to seek employment elsewhere if someone will pay them more money. It doesn't make sense getting angry at market dynamics. If any company were to apply a policy overnight that we're going to pay our CEO the same as our assembly line workers, you would likely see that company go bankrupt soon, as because the only people willing to do that job at that price probably don't have the experience to do it wisely. All the qualified candidates took jobs at your competitors' factories where they were offered more. The same is true for basketball or any other sport. People pay you money because they believe you'll make them money. Right? People are expecting these very smart people to suffer and do poorly, when really this would be a show about which person can climb the ladder the fastest. I doubt these people will struggle that badly. It's like everyone assumes a CEO is a person born into wealth that lounges around all day doing nothing. I'd bet most people would be crushed under their workload. Hey folks, Looney Left Narrator here again, and while I agree that, again, some of these people are very smart and capable and find success by being so, I disagree again with the premise that being a CEO inherently makes someone very intelligent. So many of them either have the time and cushion to make their businesses work or find a good starting job, or they're very lucky, or all of these. And the idea that they can just look for better jobs because they know their worth kind of acknowledges that they've had a life start and education that very few of their employees would have had access to. What would happen is that either the show would be faked or no CEO would ever agree to it. I think they'd get along just fine. It'd probably be a bit of a lifestyle adjustment for that month, but not something they'd be incapable of. They themselves have, in all likelihood, lived that lifestyle as they were coming up, maybe while in college or fresh out of it. Very few CEOs just waltz into the role without first having come up from the lower ranks. Almost no CEOs are billionaires, and you guys live in this fantasy world where they're evil people that are out to get you. Actually, they're just the people in the world most skilled at managing huge companies, as if you expect there to not be head of companies. They can be, and are often fired, and they typically answer to their shareholders that own the company. The internet pretending that every time minimum wage increases, food and rent price doesn't increase to screw us in the rear even more. This has already been a movie in the 80s, Trading Places with Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy. Of course, it's fiction and played for comedic effect, but I think if you strip away the laughs, it probably wouldn't be too far from the truth. Gwyneth Paltrow did what she called a food stamp challenge a few years back to prove that you could eat healthily on just that much for a month. I think it took her less than a week to give up. There was a politician here several years ago who retired from office, and they had to retire on a meager $65,000 per annum salary. They couldn't do it, so they chose not to be alive anymore instead. It would be turned into an emotionally manipulative show about the struggles of the common worker, where at the end of the episode, the one worker would get some extravagant gift or a raise, the CEO would be painted as some sort of hero to the people, all while they continue to pay 90% of their employees just above poverty wages. You should read the book Nickel and Dimed, Making It in America. It's old now, but the point still stands. An upper-class, six-figure writer tried to survive in a minimum wage job for a year. Spoiler, she needs multiple jobs and her life is miserable, but she does make it. A better reality show examined the lives of people over the age of 22 who are still stuck in minimum wage jobs. Look at the circumstances, the poor decisions they made, their levels of motivation, their work ethic and ambition. See where they came from and how they grew up. That way we can all learn valuable life lessons. I saw it. I went to private military school. Most billionaires hack it just fine. You want to see something hysterical though? Saudis. Take a Saudi's assets away. That's some primetime material right there. Since they'd be on minimum wage, does that mean they'd be allowed to live with parents rent-free while they attend public schools for free? With the only expenses they have to worry about being a weekend out with their friends? I wouldn't watch this because I'm not an angry socialist. I'm a capitalist. But I'd like to watch one of 100 documentaries where a guy has a good idea, works 18 hours a day for a decade while everyone else is getting safe jobs, goes $100 million in debt, hires an awesome creative team, turns it into something world-changing, and then all you infantile morons have to acknowledge becoming a billionaire is hard as F, and they usually deserve their money. If you'd like the titles to those documentaries, open your refrigerator, look in your garage, or check the name of the device you're reading this on. However, the germ of your premise I agree with. People should be paid a fair wage. Stop stroking yourselves to the idea of a billionaire with a flat tire. I find no enjoyment at the idea of you trying to make your own baby food with a hand masher, or using whale oil to read from the Bible for 1 hour per night. Billionaires created those luxuries for you, and now you pay pennies for them, you filthy, miserable, spoiled idiots. Also, screw Trump, he never contributed a frickin' thing to our society, except turmoil, so don't paint me with that brush. I'd watch. Some, I think, would make it just fine. Some would crap out immediately. Most would struggle along somewhere in the middle. You know, almost as if they were just people. I think the only thing that would happen is that the CEO would use that to convince themselves they're a selfless person willing to put themselves in their workers' shoes and then just go back to their multi-million-dollar mansion. We have a show like that. Rich people and poor people switch places for a week or so. Usually, the rich people don't like it, but they become creative with what to do with their time, that it's free, and in the end they're alright. The poor people go nuts and become crying with tears happy with stuff like ordering pizzas. Usually, the rich gift the poor something as well, like a new bike or a subscription to an amusement park or a sporting activity. Okay, so there's been some division between people and their answers here, but I think we'd all like to see members of Congress and the Senate do this. 1 month at minimum wage in their state. I'd watch the hell out of that. Public bathroom horror stories. The disgusting truth about people who don't flush. Okay, I did this once because I had no choice. I had to be somewhere early for work that was 1.5 hours away. So I was driving this whole time, before sunrise, drinking a coffee. A little nervous for this work thing, and now I have to go real bad. I find a random Denny's and I run straight into the bathroom. There's only one store. I lock the door and turn to find somebody else has clogged the entire bowl with paper and their own butt-borne monstrosities. I proceed to push out this ridiculous soft-serve mountain on top of the soggy paper platform, like a McDonald's ice cream cone, but with number 2. The entire pile is above the water. I had to hover and wipe just to avoid touching it. I had no choice but to top it off with a blanket of fouled paper. By the time I'm done, the summit is a good 3 inches above seat level. I could push that plunger 100 times and the whole structure wouldn't budge. Absolutely shameful. If anyone here is a Denny's employee in Northridge, California that had to deal with this, I'm so sorry. Can you imagine if a worker saw the first one, left to go get their hazmat suit on, and came back to see it had tripled in size? Used to work in a small office with 2 separate bathrooms, one on either side of our office space. Each was a tiny room with a toilet and a sink. There was a guy who, without fail, about an hour or 2 after lunch, would decimate one. Crime scene level mess with the odor to boot. and that same odor would waft out to the nearest cubicle residents who complained daily. He never flushed, and his excuse was that he had read how toilets create an aerosol effect when they're flushed, which sends a cloud of mist into the air, and he refused to endure that because who knows who else has used that toilet? Which meant someone else got the honor of being sprayed with his leavings. The boss told him he had two choices: flush and spray Lysol generously, which truly does little to abate the stench, or use the facilities somewhere else. I'm truly sorry to say that he chose to go to the nearest fast food place instead. To those valiant McDonald's employees, I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve that. As a janitor, I'd like to know the answer to this as well. Also, why poop in the urinal? Well, the bog was full, wasn't it, mate? Oh, the idea of someone just seeing that the ideal vessel was full and just shrugging, dropping trow and getting to business in the pee receptacle in full view of anyone who came into the toilet is just so comical and simultaneously a damning indictment of our species. My God, if both are full, do they just move on to the sink? Oh my God, my office at my old work was directly across from the toilet. There were 6 of us in that building, and it didn't take long to figure out who our monster bathroom defiler was, because she came in at 8 and was in the bathroom by 8:30 without fail. At about 8:40, rolling stink clouds would permeate the complex, my office being hit the worst. But honestly, it smelled so bad everyone was near to being poisoned on a daily basis. Paint peeled, plants withered and died in the wake of that gas cloud. She ate a great deal of fried food, you see, and drank nothing but coffee and soda. At least while at work. I took to closing my office door at about 8:20 and took to rolling up a blanket to block the space between the bottom of the door, and it seemed to at least keep the air breathable without the aid of gas masks. Other tricks we tried were putting a box of matches in each of the offices so we could strike them to cover up the stench, but those got taken away by management. I suppose they feared we'd burn the place down after being blinded by that stench. We even tried out dabbing Vicks under our noses. It was truly some of the worst number 2 I'd ever smelled, and I don't know why she couldn't retrain her bowels to erupt earlier before she left for work. Her husband probably threatened her with divorce if she didn't find someplace else to go. For me, I get real confused when there's no paper in the loo, and there's no way in hell that they had a ghostie with that. I'm guessing there are several names for that. I've always heard them referred to as a ghostie, though. I believe the reason people do this is called the fight or flight response. Lord knows I booked it out of there. The magical poop fairy might give the next person a quarter, so I'm just being nice. What if it's so large it doesn't flush? Poop knife. Quick military story, I used to be a missile officer in the Air Force. A couple of hundred times, 392 to be exact, in the mid-2000s, I went to remote sites and commanded nuclear missiles and stuff. Anyway, these remote sites had underground capsules replete with toilets. Some of those toilets didn't work too well on the old solids, so some of my compatriots developed a poop knife, i.e. a butter knife stolen from the site's kitchen, tied or taped to a plunger handle. We used said knife for months, maybe years, I can't remember exactly, but it cut a lot of crap down to size. Unfortunately, towards the end of my career going to those sites, that frickin' gross knife disappeared, and it was theorized that it went back into kitchen rotation. If I had to guess, it was a departing officer's way of saying F you to some petty, frustrating, stressful duty. Everybody was wary of every butter knife for months. Well, I can't flush if it's on the floor now, can I? Well, having had the office by the bathrooms, I can probably tell you. Mostly, they just don't know that it didn't go down. Epic filled bowls take more than one flush, and some people's mothers didn't raise them to check their flush. They just get up, hit the lever, and hopefully wet their hands and then leave. Other people clog the toilet. In my case, we had a plunger, but many bathrooms just don't for some ungodly reason. And even in our case, which is the toughest case you've yet to face, many people just leave because they don't know how or don't want to deal with a clogged toilet. And again, I blame bad parenting. Probably just didn't get enough hugs as a child. Oh, and there were a few people that put frickin' paper in the toilet. Those are the cat stranglers. You have to really watch out for them. Well, I only recently discovered our toilets at work are this way. In my defense, apparently the pipes are messed up and it's a delayed reaction. I only found out recently because I was one of a couple of people in the office and I was having a pretty bad stomach day. I knew for a fact that no one had gone in between my trips, and yet there was my shame in all its glory. It had come back for revenge, or to say hello, I'm not sure.
It wasn't ready to depart this world, it was unfinished business. I did my deed, I watched it flush, the water filled back up, it was clean. Then I waited, sure enough it came slinking back out like a guilty dog after eating trash. I flushed twice for number 2 now. That seems to do the trick. Well, some people just like to show off, don't they? If they wanted to show off, they should have just put it in a Ziploc bag and passed it around the Arby's like I do. Oh, God. What about the people that have sticky number 2 where no matter how many times you flush, it doesn't dislodge, and then you have to use another bowl? Can you imagine the guy doing the walk of shame to another stall to continue on his path of toilet destruction? Plugging it up would be worse. Let's let it soak for a while and then try. I've only done this once. Basically, I'd been on the road for work all day and stopped at a Chipotle to get some food in me. Naturally, I have to take a growler right after eating it, so I go into the bathroom to blow it out. About 5 minutes in, this kid starts banging on the door to use the bathroom while I'm trying to handle my business. I told him it was occupied, but this crotch fruit just wouldn't give up. He had this high-pitched voice and was telling me to hurry up and just wouldn't leave me alone. I decide if he really wants to get on as fast as possible, I could get him in about 3 seconds earlier if I don't flush. So I leave the war crime behind, and when I walked out, I couldn't help but give him a smirk as he said, "Finally." This was in the middle of Missouri, and his dad probably looked like Sea-Base, so I was already halfway out the door when I heard the kid yell, "Are you serious?" This is probably the most valid question I've ever come across yet. Working in construction and seeing some of these toilets, I need to know. One time I was in this really crowded airport bathroom and had to pee after this long flight. I ran into the bathroom and every stall had a long line coming out of it except for one stall. So I took my chances and chose the stall without a line. There was brown mess everywhere. I really had to go, so I aimed where the toilet was hiding underneath all of the doo-doo. And as I'm peeing, a line starts to form outside the stall because I guess people in the line now think this toilet is usable. I start freaking out because they're going to think I'm the one who left all of this. I finished peeing, opened the door and shouted that I didn't do that, it was like that when I got here, and I heard the next guy in line start swearing when he saw what was in the stall. I walked away with the idea that at least it's an airport, states away from where I live, and hopefully nobody will ever recognize me. Yep, I've been in that position, and even though you're innocent and just making the best of a crappy situation, pun intended, that feeling of hot shame can follow you and still occasionally make you sweat at unexpected times. Like when you're reading narration for some video on YouTube. Ugh. When my mum was a custodian, she once found a number 2 in the toilet that she literally had to cut into pieces with a knife in order to get it to flush. It was horrifying. Cut my deuce into pieces. This poop just won't contort. Pipe congestion, it's leaving. Thank frickin' God I was almost heaving. That was a song by Poopa Roach. In the only time I've done this in public, it's due to the toilet not flushing or having paper. I ended up hobbling over to another stall to wipe myself. As I was doing so, a few guys came in, one heads to the stall that I had just decimated, and blurts out, "Wow, someone took a wicked dump in here." I quietly grinned with pride. And just like that, I like this channel again. Once when I was around 10, I pooped in a public bathroom. To preface, this was a busy area at Disney World where you had to wait to use the bathroom due to how many people there were. This day I laid a log so large that I knew deep down it was meant to stay where it was laid. Fate had a different plan though, and I found out that I'm not a fan of automatic toilets that day. My 10-year-old self kept moving in front and out of the way of the sensor to flush. The toilet flushed each time, the war crime level dump, however, did not budge. Until finally the paper blocked the hole. While the back was turned, because I was a dumb kid who wasn't paying attention, I ended up having the toilet start overflowing, and I just barely saved my pants from the ungodly nasty water pouring out. The other people in the closest stalls were not so lucky. I like to think that they didn't get nasty toilet water all over their pants, but unlike most of what happens in Disneyland, this isn't a fairy tale. I was so embarrassed I had trouble ever flushing in public after that. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? About 6 months ago, I came across one of these that will haunt me for the rest of my days. I mean, I've seen some nasty, duty-covered bathrooms before. We all have. Some of us, I'm forced to acknowledge, may have covered them in the fecal matter themselves.
May they burn forever in hell. This wasn't that. Everything was in the bowl, but I can't really say where it belonged because this didn't belong in any human plumbing. I've seen sewer mains that could not have transported this number 2. It was massive. We're talking the goat se.cx guy must have stopped there massive. It was fully as large around as my calf, and I am not a small guy. I stopped, horrified, and then lifted my arm before me, palm up, and looked at my forearm before looking back into the bowl. Again, it's not a small forearm, but it looked like a small forearm that day. If that thing had been inside of me, I wouldn't have been able to walk. Had it wanted out of me, I'd have had to dull the poop knife enough that it could be applied internally. It led from just below the rim of the long-bowled, king-sized toilet right down to the drain, which it did not enter even a little because it would not fit. I can still see it in my mind's eye, and I wish I couldn't, believe me. It looked like something you might pick up while camping to throw on the firebed, fully expecting to have coals remaining in the morning. I slammed the door of the stall and backed away, and then, I'm embarrassed to admit, I stepped forward again and reopened the door, not believing it would still be there, because I must have imagined it. Nope, I didn't imagine it. Look, sometimes the toilet doesn't flush, and it's not like I can take it back out of there. I stopped at a Georgia rest stop, and I had to go. It could not wait. 6 out of the 7 toilets were already clogged with multiple other people's poops, or they had it all over the seat. So I used the only remaining good one to take a massive, been on a road trip eating fast food for 3 days, number 2. It wasn't until I'd wiped and stood up that I realized there was no way to flush this. That loo had been broken the whole time. It was clear to me then that my mountain of shame, piled some distance out of the water, would remain present for the next visitor. Embarrassed, I hastily washed my hands and I left the scene of the crime, hoping that nobody would notice. But as I turned the corner, I watched somebody enter from the other side, open the stall I was just in, and shouted, "Ah, frickin' gross!" I couldn't disagree, but I wasn't about to stick around to explain things. I hopped in my car and never looked back. C'est la guerre. When we were in Greece, I took a massive dump at a restaurant in the middle of nowhere. There was a sign when I walked in that appeared to show a person wipe their butt and then put it in the garbage. I thought nothing of it until the bowl wouldn't flush, and I realized the sign was literally telling me to wipe my butt and put the paper in the garbage. Anyway, the bus beeped its horn twice, and I knew that if I wasn't on that bus, they were leaving me behind. So there I am, staring at this massive unholy mound and a pile of crappy paper not flushing. So I said, screw it. I live thousands of miles away from here, and I need to get on that bus. So I basically sprinted away from the restroom and paraphrasingly yelled, "Sorry, I took a crap and didn't throw my toilet paper away. I'm American." And they just nodded and said, "Safe travels." Like Americans showing up and destroying the John to just up and leave was normal. It was in that moment I truly understood where the USA stood in the world. Crazy times. On the poop topic, you always wonder who the F poops in urinals, and I finally met one. In a Thai club full of white people with varying levels of food poisoning, there was only one John. While queuing up, one really ordinary guy in his 20s just said, "Dude, why are you lining up? I just took a deuce in the urinals, it's all good." And on that day I learned urinal poopers are just like you and I. I'm gonna be real, I started reading this question thinking that I was going to be called out, but I actually flush my criminal dumps. Disclaimer. This is the story about my war crime poop. I was pooping in a stall at Union Station in LA. It was one of those legs to the wall, can feel the separate layers within my intestines all being vacated kind of bowel movements. It was totally thorough. I'm in the stall near the entrance to the public restroom. I can hear the footsteps and the comments of everyone as they enter. A boy and his father walk in. "It smells like poopy in here, Daddy," or something along those lines. A few moments later, an old voice yells from the stall to my left, "God damn it! Prison rules, motherfricker! Give us a courtesy flush on that thing." At this point, I'm trying not to laugh. This movement has been a non-stop experience. My rear exit is open and I'm like a soft-serve machine down there, man. When it's time to wipe, I barely have enough room to drop in the toilet paper. I left and never looked back. If you have to stand up to finish, you know it's of biblical proportion. As a man who doesn't have a small appetite but has still never stacked a pile out of the John like the rest of you are describing, I have to ask, what are you all eating? This has at least been a wonderful refresher from some of the more serious topics I've done lately. I have to also reflect again on the fact that my mother lied about me ever outgrowing this sort of humor. Okay, story time. I was on a road trip with a couple of friends a few years ago and ended up going into a moderately busy chain or buffet kind of restaurant to eat lunch. We're Canadian, and this took place in the US of A in the middle of summer. Along the way, I discovered a flavor of blue Gatorade that we didn't have in Canada that I loved, and I'd been chugging those bad boys as I have a condition that causes me to get dehydrated easily. This becomes important later. While at dinner, I feel that rumble in my gut that tells me it's almost business time. So I head to the bathroom. It's very nice and clean, and I had my choice of about half a dozen stalls to go drop this deuce-off in. I do so without incident. I finish up doing my thing, and as I stand over the toilet, I notice that what I'd left behind was not only a beast, but almost neon blue from this exotic foreign Gatorade. Pretty cool, but not something I'd think someone else wanted to see. The toilet, however, had other ideas. I tried to flush and nothing happened. I tried again and again, and this loo had decided to go on strike. I'm not this toilet's union rep, so I'm in no place to negotiate. The washroom is empty at the time, so I decide I just have to leave it. I depart the stall and I walk over to wash my hands in the sink. As I'm washing my hands, another gentleman enters the room. Just as I'm turning to leave the room, I notice that of all the urinals and stalls he could have chosen from, he walked right into the one I'd just befouled with what looked like a sentient blue alien slug baby. Fortunately, since he didn't see me walk out of that stall and there were many other options, it couldn't be concluded that I must have been the culprit. But I admit I found it pretty hilarious that the last thing I heard while leaving said restroom was the exclamation of, "Oh, what the frick?" from a stranger. I hope my giant blue turd didn't cause that poor man permanent psychological damage. Oh, this is a favorite story from some of my friends. It took place 6 years ago this week. This is the last time I made my dad laugh. Literally, this story. He was scheduled for some tests at the hospital, so I went there to see what the results were. It was an angiogram, so kind of a big deal. I woke up late and in a rush. I grabbed my clothes out of the dryer. However, we had washed a down comforter, and it broke apart and feathers were everywhere. I stopped by McDonald's and grabbed 2 Egg McMuffins and ate them on the way. Got to the hospital and immediately had to go. Real bad, like having to do the walk. And something was seriously wrong with my undies too. I'd not been to this hospital before, and when I finally found the bathroom, it was out of service. But a nurse directed me to another. It was a single, handicapped-capable bathroom. I ran in there. I nearly didn't get my pants down fast enough, and when I did, feathers flew everywhere from my clothes. From the comforter that had broken, you see. Clumps and clumps of feathers, and then the explosion of liquefied Egg McDeath muffins came out. Saying it was bad is an understatement. I wiped and stood up to survey the damage. I was not prepared for the sight. There was crap and feathers frickin' everywhere. It looked like somebody had crapped out a gosh darn chicken. It was a sight to behold, and I thought, what would I think if I came across this? I'd wonder what the frick had happened forever. And so I decided that someone else should have that honor. To come across something that looked like an emu turd golem being born. And with that, I left it. I had a customer years and years ago. She hated me, and I never really knew why. I was polite, eager to help, but not obnoxious. My boss theorized it was because I was a kid. Mind you, I was about 21, but looked about 15. I found out she worked as a cleaner for public toilets, and that included a local one. One day I was serving her at the register, and she was paying cash. Instead of handing the money over like a decent human, she tossed it and waited for me to pick up the coins. I picked up the coins and smiled, asking if she was okay, and I brushed it off as an accident. On my lunch break, she did it to the local cafe worker, a girl who was around my age. I asked around, and yep, she did this to all the kids who served her. So I did what any mature 21-year-old would do. I worked in a pharmacy, so I bought some laxatives and waited until after my shift. I went to the local public toilet that I knew she cleaned, and I let out the biggest, wettest, most cramp-induced doozy that I'd ever done. It hurt, and I swear I lost a few kilograms. I pulled out a Sharpie and I wrote in the cubicle, "Treat us with respect," and then, "You throw money, we throw crap," and so on and so forth. I did a stakeout. I was a distance away in a parking lot and I waited. Ate some Maccas and waited some more. At around 7:30 or 8, she arrived in her glorious uniform and her trolley of goods. She went in and came out and choked. I laughed and laughed. She was in there for close to an hour. The next time I served her, she was timid. She was scared. She did not throw money at me. Okay, update. About a week or so after this crap went down, pun intended, she was back in the pharmacy and she was all witchy again, but with no money throwing. So I decided to do one last, smaller, non-laxative-induced turd for her. This time I didn't do a stakeout because I couldn't be effed, but I left a decent-sized turd baby in that porcelain with only one thing written in Sharpie. We're still watching you. In short, I took laxatives to get revenge on a cleaner who was mean to me and my peers. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all of the stories. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.